Hey guys, tonight we step back into the warm, mildly pungent streets of Renaissance Italy. Imagine yourself strolling along narrow cobblestone roads, gently lit by flickering lanterns, passing bustling cheese stalls brimming with wheels of Parmesan, wedges of Pecorino, and blocks of Taleggio. The air, thick and rich, carries the unmistakable aroma of ripened dairy. Tonight we'll dive into a topic that was a surprisingly big deal back then, so crucial in fact that you'd probably not survive without understanding it thoroughly. Official cheese weighers. Yes, cheese weighers. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, why not drop a comment below letting me know where you're tuning in from and what the local time is right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture yourself in a vibrant marketplace in Florence or Milan, sometime in the 15th century. The sun gently warms the stone beneath your feet, while merchants in fine tunics loudly advertise their wares, their voices echoing melodically between ornate stone buildings. Amid the usual calls for fresh bread, salted meats and crisp vegetables, one call rises above all others, the urgent cry of cheese sellers. Now cheese was not just any ordinary commodity, it was practically currency. Imagine walking into a tavern and casually slapping a wedge of Parmesan on the table as payment. No kidding, cheese was frequently used in barter transactions, serving both as sustenance and a standard of value. Because of this critical economic importance, Italy developed an astonishingly rigorous and official network of cheese weighers, whose sole purpose was ensuring fairness, quality control, and, most crucially, tax accuracy. Yes, tax accuracy, because when money's involved, governments tend to pay attention. Italy's city-states like Venice, Genoa, and Florence competed fiercely not only for military or artistic dominance, but also in their methods of managing trade, especially cheese trade. The noble officials in these regions quickly learned that accurate weighing was essential to maintaining their financial power, so they appointed entire battalions of meticulous cheese weighers, men trained to scrutinize each gram and ounce of dairy goodness. Now you might be wondering, why couldn't any shopkeeper just toss cheese on a scale and call it a day? Ah, dear listener, simplicity rarely finds a place in history, especially in the bureaucratic maze of Renaissance Italy. Merchants, of course, sought profit, sometimes by questionable methods, slightly adjusted scales, discreetly hollowed-out cheeses filled with hidden weights, or even creatively reshaped wheels of cheese. These sneaky little tricks were disturbingly common. That's where official cheese weighers came in, heroes armed not with swords, but scales. Picture them now strolling through crowded marketplaces with an air of somber dignity, their presence causing merchants to suddenly stand up straighter, their eyes nervously darting around. These men carried scales intricately adorned with city insignia, calibrated to exacting standards. Some even boasted decorative filigree and tiny ornamental bells, possibly the least subtle instruments of inspection ever devised. Interestingly, the role was not just practical, it became prestigious. Wealthy merchants and ambitious men would proudly send their sons to apprentice under veteran cheese weighers, a stepping stone towards political prominence and social recognition. Yet despite this pride and prestige, the actual daily life of these weighers wasn't glamorous. Imagine spending your day inhaling the heavy scent of aging cheese, your hands perpetually greasy from touching endless wheels, while trying not to be swayed by cheese merchants offering subtle and not-so-subtle bribes. You see, bribery was inevitable in a trade so tied to economic prosperity. Merchants, desperate to ensure their products passed inspection, often slipped extra wedges of cheese, or sometimes actual money, into the weighers' pockets. As we'll explore later, corruption scandals periodically rocked the cheese-weighing world, making headlines long before tabloids or Twitter existed. Historians still argue whether the sheer number of official cheese weighers truly curbed corruption or inadvertently encouraged it. Some contend that more inspectors meant tighter controls and fewer scams. Others suggest the opposite, that a large bureaucracy only opened new doors for bribery and misconduct. But whichever side of the debate you lean towards, it's clear that cheese weighing had become an unexpectedly central institution, entangled in economics, politics, and even cultural identity. And that's what makes this topic so endlessly fascinating. Cheese weighers weren't just practical officials performing mundane tasks. They embodied the quirky, charmingly absurd complexity of Renaissance society itself. From their meticulous daily routines to their surprisingly elaborate social roles, cheese weighers quietly shaped the world around them, one wheel at a time. So as you drift deeper into relaxation tonight, let your mind wander through these narrow cobblestone streets where the subtle aroma of pecorino mingles with whispers of scandal, intrigue, and cheese-related bureaucracy. Rest assured, we'll uncover every delightful detail in the sections ahead, just as soon as you're ready for them. As you wander deeper into these bustling streets of Renaissance Italy, the scent of cheese becomes thicker, wrapping around you like a soft woolen cloak. Each turn reveals another shop bursting with pungent dairy delights, their aromas mingling sweetly with the earthy fragrance of freshly baked bread. Merchants greet customers loudly, enthusiastically waving wedges and wheels in the air, their eyes sparkling with anticipation and charm. But beyond the smiles and flourishing gestures lies a reality you might not immediately consider. Cheese was the cornerstone of the economy. Imagine a world where cheese wasn't merely an afterthought on your sandwich or a fancy snack paired with wine. Instead, it was a foundational good, a critical commodity upon which entire livelihoods depended. Cities and towns flourished or floundered based on their dairy trade, making cheese far more essential than you might comfortably admit. This wasn't merely about taste, though Italian cheeses were, of course, unmatched in quality. No offense, France. But Italy had a reputation to uphold. It was about practicality and preservation. Cheese offered a reliable source of nutrition in an era without refrigerators or preservatives, other than salt, of course. Hard cheeses like Parmigiano Reggiano could last months or even years if stored properly, serving as an edible insurance policy against famine and hardship. And since cheese was so essential, its trade became intricately intertwined with local economics. In fact, many Italian cities levied taxes specifically on cheese production and trade, using these revenues to fund ambitious projects, everything from building spectacular cathedrals to financing wars and elaborate festivities. Picture that for a moment. A cathedral financed by taxes on mozzarella balls. It's hard to think of cheese in the same way again, isn't it? Yet perhaps most fascinatingly, cheese wasn't just traded within Italy. It became a valuable export, sought after across Europe. Traders packed cheeses tightly into barrels, carting them across the Alps or loading them onto ships headed toward England, France, and the bustling markets of northern Europe. Italian cheeses were coveted abroad, their quality rigorously inspected, documented, and fiercely protected by official weighers who acted almost like guardians of national reputation. And speaking of those weighers, you might be wondering how this position became so prevalent. Couldn't merchants handle their own weights? Well, in theory, yes, but human nature has a way of complicating things. Merchants, naturally driven by profit, sometimes leaned towards what we might politely call creative weighing methods. A slightly shaved wheel here, a cleverly adjusted scale there. Small adjustments could yield significant profits over time. Historians still argue whether these manipulations were widespread or merely isolated incidents exaggerated by anxious city officials. However, the presence of hundreds of official weighers scattered throughout Italy's marketplaces and trading hubs suggests these concerns were very real. City governments took no chances. Their solution was simple yet ingenious: an army of impartial, trained, government-sanctioned cheese weighers. Each town or city-state established precise regulations for cheese weighing, right down to the tiniest detail. Regulations often differed from one city to another. Florence might favor strict, exacting standards, while Venice permitted slight variances. Such differences complicated intercity trade but underscored regional pride and independence. It was like each city was subtly declaring, "Our cheese, our rules." If you happen to be a cheese weigher yourself, Your task wasn't just measuring weight, it was maintaining the integrity of the city's economy. Imagine arriving each morning to a busy marketplace square. You'd unfold your scale carefully, aware that every merchant's eyes are fixed on your hands, watching for any sign of leniency or harshness. Your decision to approve or reject a cheese's declared weight could ripple through the economy, impacting profits, taxes, and ultimately your city's reputation. No pressure, right? But the work didn't end there. Weighers also had to keep detailed records, scribbling carefully in large ledgers bound in leather and vellum. These volumes meticulously documented each transaction, recording precise weights, merchant names, and taxes paid. These records weren't just bureaucratic busy work, they served as historical archives, providing modern historians a surprising level of insight into the daily lives of Renaissance Italians. Who knew a cheese ledger could be such a treasure trove? And then, of course, there was the cheese itself, not just a trade good. Cheese was woven into the cultural fabric of daily life. Families often had their own favorite weigher, one they trusted implicitly and perhaps even invited over for celebrations. Weddings, festivals, and religious ceremonies frequently involved cheese-weighing rituals, elevating a seemingly mundane task into something practically sacred. The ritualized importance placed upon weighing cheese underscores how deeply rooted dairy products were in social and ceremonial life. Yet for all the dignity and prestige associated with being a cheese weigher, the job also carried certain risks, mostly in the form of angry merchants and disgruntled customers. Imagine carefully weighing a prized wheel of pecorino only to declare it underweight by a fraction, instantly stripping it of value. Merchants might protest, voices rising in frustration, demanding recounts or reweighing. Such disputes occasionally escalated into public spectacles, attracting curious crowds eager for drama. Cheese weighing, apparently, could be a spectator sport in Renaissance Italy. Despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, the role of cheese weighers remained indispensable. They weren't merely minor bureaucrats, but central figures who ensured economic fairness, upheld civic pride, and inadvertently provided future generations with fascinating glimpses into Renaissance life. As you imagine these marketplaces bustling with life, scales clinking, merchants shouting, and ledgers carefully filled, you begin to understand why cheese weighers weren't just a quirky curiosity. They were the lifeblood of an economy reliant on precision and trust. But there's still much more to explore, more scandals and celebrations, rivalries and rituals, all wrapped gently in parchment paper, labeled, and waiting patiently for you to unwrap in the sections ahead. Wandering further into Renaissance Italy's lively cheese scene, you notice something intriguing. City-states weren't just fiercely independent politically. They competed over cheese too, and remarkably, even cheese weighers found themselves entangled in regional rivalries. Take Venice, for example. Pofoltique, the city of canals and gondolas, grand palaces and masked balls, was also astonishingly protective of its cheese reputation. Venetian cheese weighers were trained with near-military rigor, meticulously tutored not only in precision measurement but also in the subtle art of diplomacy. Why diplomacy, you wonder? Because Venetian cheese, particularly their renowned Piave and Grana Padano, was essential, not just economically but politically. A single, misweighed wheel of cheese could trigger disputes between trading partners, unraveling months of careful negotiations. So there you stand, picturing yourself as a Venetian weigher, a prestigious job, yet nerve-wrackingly complex. Each morning, you carefully don your official robes, elaborately embroidered with the city's lion symbol, which, although majestic, made sneaking past disgruntled merchants practically impossible. Imagine trying to evade an irate cheese seller wearing a robe as conspicuous as a Renaissance neon sign. As a weigher in Venice, your duties didn't end at the scales. You'd carefully navigate the labyrinthine alleys, canals gently lapping nearby, your delicate balancing act metaphorical as much as literal. Merchants would court your favor with subtle flattery, offering small gifts like expensive spices, rare silks, or, of course, bonus wedges of their finest cheese. Accepting such gifts was technically prohibited, but enforcement was uneven at best. The decision to resist temptation was yours alone, a daily ethical battle fought one delicious bribe at a time. Meanwhile, in Florence, cheese weighing carried its own distinct flavour of rivalry. Florentines were notoriously proud. After all, this was the city of Michelangelo, Da Vinci and Botticelli. Naturally, they believed their cheeses were just as masterful as their art, and they fiercely guarded the purity of their dairy products. Florentine weighers were subjected to rigorous audits, their scales meticulously recalibrated weekly. Historians still argue whether Florence's intense obsession with accuracy came from genuine dedication or simply from fear of humiliation by neighbouring city-states. Most likely, it was both. Imagine yourself now as a Florentine cheese weigher. Unlike your Venetian counterpart, your attire was simpler, less ostentatious, though still stylish, because let's face it, this was Florence. But your job came with unique stresses. Strict oversight committees scrutinized your every action. You could barely sneeze without a written report. Such oversight naturally led to high levels of anxiety among weighers, some of whom, according to historical gossip, turned to drinking herbal potions supposedly infused with calming herbs. Whether these concoctions worked or merely gave weighers a vague herbal scent is another open historical question. Likely the latter. And what about Genoa, famed for its bustling harbour and bustling cheese trade? Genoese weighers operated in an entirely different environment, one dominated by maritime commerce. You can practically smell the salty breeze mingling with aged provolone as ships docked, unloading cargo filled with exotic spices and textiles. Genoese weighers faced the extra challenge of inspecting cheeses after long sea journeys. Moisture, salt air, and temperature changes often caused weight fluctuations, making precision weighing a daily game of patience and guesswork. Now picture a moment when a shipment of cheese arrives from Sardinia. You carefully unseal barrels, wary of pungent odors and the potential explosion of aromas. There's a vivid legend of a particularly unlucky weigher opening a barrel filled with overripe cheese, causing the potent smell to linger around the harbour for weeks, much to the local residents' distress and perhaps amusement. While these city-states navigated their cheese rivalries, smaller towns had their own quirky competitions. Take Parma and Modena, cities so fiercely proud of their cheese heritage that disagreements over cheese-weighing techniques occasionally spilled over into public disputes. Imagine townsfolk heatedly debating the ideal scale calibration for Parmigiano Reggiano, or which exact weighing ritual best honoured their cheese. It sounds comical, yet to them, cheese was no laughing matter. It was cultural pride, economic necessity, and culinary artistry rolled into one. Occasionally, these rivalries escalated to more overt conflicts. Yes, actual skirmishes over cheese weighing. Picture a crowd gathering on a misty morning in a market square, two rival cheese weighers dramatically facing off. It's hardly swordplay. Instead, they battle through meticulous reweighing contests, crowds cheering or jeering with each recalibrated ounce. Such conflicts might seem trivial now, but back then victory brought genuine honour and prestige, not to mention lucrative business advantages. Historians still argue whether such theatrical conflicts were staged purely for entertainment or whether genuine animosity underlay these public spectacles. Some insist that weighers secretly colluded, organising these elaborate battles simply to boost market traffic. Others counter that the rivalries were indeed genuine, driven by economic stakes, civic pride, or perhaps sheer boredom. The truth likely lies somewhere delightfully in between. Interestingly, foreign diplomats and merchants who visited these cheese-loving cities often commented on the seemingly absurd attention given to cheese weighing. English and French travellers in particular documented their astonishment, writing home incredulously about the lengths to which Italians went to measure dairy products. It's easy to imagine their letters filled with puzzled bemusement. Italians weigh cheese as carefully as gold and with more seriousness than church sermons. But as your imaginary stroll through these crowded marketplaces continues, you begin to understand why cheese weighing, despite its humorous absurdities, mattered so deeply. Cheese wasn't merely food, it symbolized wealth, pride, tradition, and economic security. Each city-state, desperate to maintain its unique identity amid the political chaos of Renaissance Italy, naturally placed immense value on something as tangible and comforting as cheese. So tonight, as you relax further into sleepiness, savor these gently absurd rivalries, picturing the animated debates, colorful scales, ornate robes, and delightfully mundane dramas that defined daily life for cheese weighers. Because even though we're centuries removed, it's comforting and oddly charming to know that human nature hasn't really changed. We might debate over different commodities today, but our desire for precision, fairness, and a bit of theatrical competition remains timeless. Rest easy, knowing there's much more to uncover in this aromatic, whimsical, cheese-infused journey ahead. Strolling further through this aromatic Renaissance marketplace, you begin to notice another layer of delightful absurdity, the chaos of weights and measures themselves. It might seem strange to modern sensibilities, accustomed as we are to neat metric systems or standardized units, but back in Renaissance Italy, consistency was as rare as a cheesemonger willing to give you an extra slice without charging. Imagine yourself now as a weary traveller passing through the countryside, stopping at villages along your route. At one market, a libra might weigh exactly 12 ounces, a few miles down the road. Down the road, the next town insists their libra equals 16 ounces. And then you arrive at a bustling city square, only to discover their version, inexplicably, equals 14 ounces, because why not? Now picture the frustration of traders hauling their cheeses from place to place, endlessly recalibrating expectations, wondering if anyone could agree on anything, ever. Historians still argue whether this relentless inconsistency arose from ignorance, regional stubbornness, or clever economic strategy. Some scholars suggest towns deliberately varied measures to trap visiting merchants into paying extra taxes or fees. Others insist it was simply local pride, each region, proudly or stubbornly, clinging to traditions that made perfect sense to them alone. Whatever the reason, navigating these discrepancies demanded patience and skill, both from merchants and from the official cheese weighers tasked with enforcing accuracy. Cheese weighers weren't just guardians of weight, they had to memorize the bewildering array of standards unique to each city-state, town, and even individual cheese shop. Think of them as Renaissance-era mathematicians forced into daily mental gymnastics, juggling fractions, ounces, and libras, all while maintaining a perfectly straight face. And speaking of faces, let's pause briefly to consider the look of quiet despair on the face of a novice cheese weigher experiencing their first official weigh-in. Imagine arriving early at the market square, your crisp new uniform itching at your neck, nervously setting up your scales. Merchants gather eagerly around you, their smiles friendly yet predatory, watching carefully as you fumble through notebooks filled with complicated tables and regional conversions. Every slip of your finger could spark arguments or public ridicule, making you wish you'd chosen a simpler job like Renaissance-era lion tamer or something equally relaxing. But despite these hurdles, cheese weighers persevered, bringing order to this dairy-based chaos. Their meticulous record-keeping gradually became legendary, filling volumes that would make a modern accountant swoon with envy or horror. Imagine these leather-bound books, stacked floor to ceiling, carefully preserved in city archives, detailing centuries' worth of cheese transactions. Historians still pore over these records today, unraveling economic trends, dietary habits, and even climate patterns. Yes, climate patterns, because, believe it or not, annual cheese production often reflected agricultural conditions, thus indirectly recording weather variations over decades. Back in Renaissance Italy, though, these meticulous records had immediate practical uses. They determined taxes and fees, making weighers indispensable to city treasuries. You'd almost think weighers would receive special privileges, perhaps reserved seats at banquets or invitations to grand events. But alas, prestige came with limits. Mostly, cheese weighers enjoyed a quiet respect, tempered by a certain degree of wariness, similar to how you might treat your friendly neighborhood IRS agent today. This painstakingly precise weighing process inevitably attracted attempts at fraud. Merchants, inventive creatures they were, devised increasingly cunning methods to fool weighers, A classic trick involved hollowing out wheels of cheese and inserting hidden weights inside, carefully disguising seams. Picture an unsuspecting weigher placing such a doctored wheel onto his scales, only to watch helplessly as the numbers indicated perfection, unaware of the sneaky deception hidden just beneath the surface. More daring scams involve bribery, as we briefly mentioned earlier. Merchants would sometimes discreetly offer weighers valuable spices, luxurious fabrics, or even small pouches of silver coins in exchange for leniency. Imagine the internal dilemma faced by these weighers, balancing ethical principles against tempting bribes. And remember, refusing could have consequences. Offended merchants might spread rumors, damage your reputation, or, worse yet, switch their business to rival towns. Bribery, historians contend, was practically an institutional hazard of the profession. Yet despite occasional scandals, official weighers generally remained trusted, respected figures. Townsfolk appreciated their role in maintaining fair trade practices, viewing weighers as impartial guardians of the public good, even if they occasionally muttered about their taxes under their breath. Weighers became minor celebrities, their names known throughout communities, celebrated during local festivals, and sometimes even immortalized in murals or statues. But before you start imagining grandiose marble sculptures dedicated to cheese weighers, it's worth noting these tributes were modest, charmingly mundane rather than heroic. Picture a quaint painting in a local chapel depicting a serene weigher standing calmly beside his scales, surrounded by gently glowing halos of cheese wheels. Certainly not Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, but endearingly fitting for these quiet champions of dairy fairness. As you drift further into relaxation, let your thoughts gently wander through these whimsical inconsistencies, the patient efforts of cheese weighers, and the endless creativity of merchants determined to tip the scales, literally, in their favor. These minor dramas, so absurd yet earnestly significant, highlight a truth often overlooked in grand historical narratives: humanity's enduring passion for fairness, precision, and perhaps most importantly, good cheese. Rest now, knowing that even in the simplest acts of weighing and measuring lies a beautiful, comforting complexity woven gently into the fabric of daily life, much like the soft blanket wrapped around you tonight. Picture yourself waking at dawn, your eyes heavy with sleep, as you stretch and begin preparing for another day in the surprisingly intricate life of a Renaissance cheese weigher. You step onto cool stone floors and glance briefly at your official uniform, a richly embroidered tunic in the colors of your city-state. Honestly, whoever designed these outfits had a flair for fashion and zero appreciation for comfort. But comfort, sadly, isn't your primary concern this morning. After dressing, you take a small breakfast, likely bread, and, yes, cheese, before heading out into the still, quiet streets. The city wakes gently around you, bakers already hard at work, filling the air with the aroma of fresh bread, milkmen making their rounds with sleepy cows lumbering behind, and other merchants setting up their stalls, their voices subdued in the early hours. You make your way to the market square, feeling the weight of responsibility settle once more upon your shoulders. It's not exactly a heavy burden, just slightly heavier than you'd prefer before coffee, or whatever caffeinated beverage Renaissance Italy managed without Starbucks. The marketplace slowly springs to life around you, the sun rising gently, casting golden light across tables piled high with produce, meat, textiles, and, of course, mountains of cheese. Upon arrival, your first task is calibrating your scales. Picture yourself carefully placing small standardized weights inscribed with intricate symbols onto the pans, testing the balance repeatedly until perfection is achieved. Nearby merchants watch you with a mixture of admiration, skepticism, and thinly disguised impatience. They've seen this routine hundreds of times, yet their livelihoods still hang precariously on your careful adjustments. Once your scales are calibrated, your real work begins. Merchants line up, carrying their cheeses, some small wedges, others massive wheels requiring several people to lift. You start weighing each item methodically, your movements calm and precise, almost meditative in their repetition. You quickly learn that this is not a job for the impatient or easily distracted. It demands patience and a keen eye, qualities you quietly pride yourself on possessing, despite occasional fantasies of tossing the scales aside and running off to join a traveling circus. But then again, circuses didn't offer quite the same level of cheesy benefits. As the day wears on, you interact with merchants whose personalities vary as much as their cheeses. Some sellers approach nervously, glancing anxiously between you and their cheese wheels, praying silently that you won't detect subtle discrepancies. Others stride confidently forward, their attitudes bold enough to suggest their cheeses are practically blessed by the Pope himself. You begin to understand that each merchant has developed unique rituals and traditions around cheese weighing. Some cross themselves nervously before handing over their goods, whispering quick prayers. Others recite elaborate incantations, quietly of course, since the church frowned on overt superstition that supposedly guaranteed favorable weights. One particular vendor, a woman named Maria, always taps her cheese wheels 3 times, believing it warded off any chance of bad luck at the scales. Historians still argue whether such rituals genuinely reflected belief or were merely charming theatrics designed to distract weary weighers. Likely both. Your interactions aren't limited merely to merchants either. Occasionally, townsfolk gather to watch, treating cheese weighing as entertainment. This might sound odd, but remember, Renaissance-era Netflix options were rather limited. Your meticulous handling of cheeses became a soothing spectacle, calming yet curiously captivating. Imagine citizens chatting amiably, munching on street snacks, pointing approvingly or tutting sympathetically as you accept or reject each cheese wheel. On rare occasions, someone might even applaud a particularly impressive display of precision. After all, everyone loves a good show, even if it involves dairy products. But your day isn't always peaceful. Sometimes heated disputes erupt right at your scales. Merchants contest your measurements, their voices rising dramatically, arms flailing theatrically, occasionally even drawing in curious city guards to mediate. One notable argument you once witnessed involved a cheese so stubbornly underweight, the merchant angrily accused your scales of being possessed by demons. While entertaining, such outbursts made your job significantly harder, though secretly, you sometimes enjoyed the spectacle. It certainly kept boredom at bay. After hours of meticulous weighing, lunch offers brief respite. Usually this meal involves cheese, which at this point in your career feels slightly redundant, but at least ensures ample calcium intake. As you relax briefly, other weighers join you, exchanging stories, jokes, and advice about particularly tricky merchants or inventive fraud attempts encountered earlier that day. These lunches become quiet rituals themselves, filled with gentle camaraderie, grumbling about city officials, and occasional laughter over shared mishaps. Post-lunch, the work continues relentlessly. Occasionally, you take brief breaks to recalibrate your scales, mindful of accuracy slipping throughout the day. These moments offer a tiny pause, allowing you to stretch tired muscles and glance around the bustling square. You see children playing near fountains, elderly townsfolk leisurely strolling arm in arm, and shopkeepers calling out special offers, a comforting tapestry of everyday life, reminding you why your meticulous work matters deeply, even if it feels routine. As evening approaches, you carefully pack up your scales, storing them safely away until tomorrow. Merchants exchange final goodbyes, either cheerfully thanking you or shooting furtive glares if their cheeses failed inspection. You walk home through quieting streets, the soft glow of candlelit windows illuminating your path. The weight of the day lifts slowly, replaced by gentle satisfaction and exhaustion. Tonight, as you sink into your bed, muscles tired yet pleasantly relaxed, you reflect briefly on your role. Cheese weighing might seem trivial or even humorous from a modern perspective, but back here in Renaissance Italy, it felt significant. You were a crucial thread woven into the economic, social, and cultural fabric of daily life, quietly essential, reliably precise. Let these gentle thoughts accompany you into peaceful sleep, knowing more stories and charming peculiarities await in the coming sections, ready for your enjoyment once you're fully rested. Imagine yourself standing quietly beside your perfectly calibrated scales, the sun gently warming your back as a hush spreads through the crowd gathered in the market square. You're not just weighing cheese right now, you're performing a ritual, an act of significance and solemnity. In Renaissance Italy, cheese weighing was never as simple as tossing wheels on a scale. It involved an astonishingly detailed set of traditions and formalities, making it feel less like routine commerce and more like a sacred ceremony, minus the chanting monks, though those could occasionally appear if someone's cheese was particularly suspect. Picture merchants approaching your scales cautiously, their faces serious, eyes fixed nervously on your every movement. You gently accept the wheel, holding it up momentarily as if presenting a precious offering, turning it in your hands slowly, inspecting its texture and color. Your practiced eyes quickly notice irregularities, a tiny indentation here, a suspicious bulge there, each imperfection subtly affecting the wheel's potential weight and value. As you place the cheese gently onto your scale, there's a collective intake of breath from the watching crowd, the tension palpable. It might feel absurd, after all, it's only cheese. But remember, livelihoods and reputations are at stake. The delicate balance of your scales, precisely measured and maintained, serves as both tool and symbolic guardian of fairness. Watching those pans move slowly towards equilibrium is almost hypnotic, a soothing yet oddly suspenseful moment that keeps crowds returning day after day. The weighing itself wasn't your only responsibility. Once balanced, the weight had to be formally announced, a declaration given with an authority befitting your status as official weigher. You'd call out the exact weight in clear, authoritative tones, carefully avoiding hesitation, lest it suggest uncertainty, or worse yet, suspicion of fraud. Merchants either smiled triumphantly, satisfied that their wares had passed muster, or frowned, already mentally calculating potential losses and adjustments to tomorrow's batches. Historians still argue whether this ceremonial approach to cheese weighing developed organically or was deliberately fostered by city authorities to reinforce their importance. Some scholars suggest the ritualistic nature grew from genuine reverence. After all, cheese production involved skilled craftsmanship and considerable labor, deserving recognition and respect. Others cynically propose these ceremonies were engineered primarily to justify taxation, subtly reminding merchants and bystanders of civic authority and the ever-watchful gaze of government oversight. Either way, these rituals quickly embedded themselves deeply into daily market life, transforming cheese, weighing from mundane necessity into an almost theatrical performance. Special occasions and festivals, such as religious holidays or city celebrations, heightened these rituals further. Picture a feast day celebrating a local saint, the market decorated with garlands and banners fluttering cheerfully above your head. On such days, weighing cheese became even more elaborate, involving ornate scales reserved exclusively for special events. These ceremonial scales, decorated lavishly with gold filigree, symbols of prosperity or religious iconography, emphasized the symbolic significance of cheese weighing. It felt like stepping onto a carefully prepared stage, only your audience cared deeply about dairy rather than drama. During these celebrations, even city dignitaries occasionally appeared to oversee or participate in weighings, lending prestige and legitimacy to the proceedings. Imagine a local lord or bishop carefully weighing the first ceremonial wheel of the day, symbolically endorsing civic unity and economic health. Of course, these dignitaries rarely knew what they were doing, often fumbling amusingly, their discomfort subtly enjoyed by merchants and townsfolk alike. Interestingly, such events frequently included public feasts or cheese tastings immediately following the weigh-in, partly celebration, partly marketing strategy. Imagine a crowded table overflowing with freshly weighed cheeses, merchants proudly offering samples, hoping to impress customers enough to secure future sales. Townsfolk eagerly participated, tasting cheeses and debating passionately over flavors, textures, and regional rivalries. You stand to the side, quietly proud of your role in facilitating these delightful communal experiences, even if your stomach occasionally protests at yet another day filled entirely with cheese-based cuisine. Cheese weighers also played key ceremonial roles in weddings and christenings, believe it or not. Weddings especially required symbolic cheese weighings representing prosperity, fertility, and the hopeful weight of marital bliss, an idea that admittedly felt heavy-handed, pun fully intended. Imagine yourself carefully weighing a specially prepared ceremonial cheese, the happy couple anxiously watching, interpreting your announcement as an omen of future fortune. May your marriage be as rich and perfectly balanced as this wheel of pecorino, you might intone with practiced solemnity, secretly hoping you hadn't accidentally chosen the slightly mouldy wheel instead. Yet despite the grandeur, rituals weren't always straightforward. Sometimes your scales refused cooperation, either due to genuine mechanical issues or perhaps mischievous spirits determined to entertain themselves at your expense. Historians still debate whether weighers genuinely believed these mishaps were supernatural or merely convenient excuses for errors. Regardless, when scales misbehaved, you had to perform quick troubleshooting, often improvising ingenious solutions, much to the crowd's amusement or sympathy, depending on the day. One amusingly recorded historical incident involved a stubborn scale during a major festival that repeatedly refused accurate calibration. Imagine the increasingly desperate weigher finally resorting to loudly reciting prayers over the scales, half sincere, half theatrical, before they inexplicably cooperated. Spectators cheered uproariously, interpreting the incident as divine approval, while skeptics quietly wondered about hidden magnets or sneaky assistants pulling strings off stage. By day's end, these rituals left you simultaneously exhausted and satisfied. Each weighing, each declaration, each carefully maintained tradition contributed meaningfully to your city's social cohesion, economic stability, and even civic pride. You were more than just a mundane official. You were a steward of tradition, a performer in daily civic theatre, subtly yet significantly shaping community identity. So tonight, as you gently drift towards sleep, let your thoughts wander softly through these charming rituals, picturing vividly decorated scales, anxious merchants, cheering crowds, and your own calm presence at the center of it all, quietly guiding fairness, tradition, and community through the simple yet profound act of weighing cheese. Sleep deeply, knowing more delightful details await you in the gentle sections ahead, ready to comfort and amuse once you've rested. Standing by your trusted scales, you watch carefully as the next merchant approaches, a familiar face with a slightly forced smile. You notice he's sweating more than usual, his fingers fidgeting nervously around the edge of a large wheel of aged parmesan. You gently place the cheese onto your scales, eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, of course, merely curiosity. The pans sway delicately, settling into balance, yet something feels slightly off. It's your instinct, honed by countless weighings, whispering that perhaps there's more to this cheese than meets the eye, or nose, for that matter. In Renaissance Italy, cheese fraud was shockingly common, a constant game of cat and mouse between ambitious merchants and vigilant weighers. Every day brought new inventive attempts to deceive your scales. Merchants hollowed out wheels, hiding extra weight cleverly within. Others cunningly substituted heavy ingredients, occasionally even filling cavities with cheap materials like sand or tiny pebbles. One legendary fraudster, according to local law, even stuffed wheels with small lumps of iron, making the deception glaringly obvious when discovered, much to the amusement of local gossip circles. Historians still argue whether these tricks were driven by economic desperation, playful audacity, or sheer mischief. Some suggest merchants engaged in fraud only when times grew particularly tough, prices rose sharply, or tax demands intensified. Others counter that fraud was simply part of doing business, an everyday annoyance you managed alongside unruly livestock and irritating neighbors. Regardless, your job was to sniff out deception, quite literally at times, keeping commerce fair and the cheese market stable. Your expertise in detecting fraud became legendary, respected among fellow weighers, merchants, and even suspicious city authorities. Merchants developed grudging admiration for your sharp eyes, though occasionally you'd overhear colorful mutterings under their breath. Some merchants even made bets among themselves, wagering who could successfully fool you first, a dubious honor nobody had yet managed, although many still tried. Consider the case of Giorgio, a notoriously inventive cheesemonger with a playful streak. Giorgio delighted in challenging weighers, devising ever more elaborate tricks. One memorable day, Giorgio presented a perfectly ordinary-looking wheel of taleggio. As you lifted it, you immediately sensed an unusual heaviness, but when weighed, it appeared perfectly balanced. Suspicious yet intrigued, you carefully sliced into the wheel right there in the market square, revealing hidden compartments meticulously filled with tiny metal discs. Giorgio merely shrugged sheepishly, admitting defeat graciously, though he remained unrepentant, cheerfully promising more creative attempts next week. Your interactions with Giorgio and others like him added a playful dimension to your daily routine, keeping your senses sharp and boredom at bay. However, not every fraudster was as friendly. Some merchants reacted angrily when caught, loudly protesting their innocence, dramatically accusing your scales or eyesight of malfunctioning. Imagine facing a red-faced cheesemonger passionately gesticulating, drawing curious crowds eager for drama. Occasionally, city guards intervened to calm tensions, though they seemed more amused than concerned, secretly enjoying these marketplace theatrics as much as anyone. Despite occasional confrontations, your approach remained patient, methodical, and impeccably polite, qualities that only enhanced your reputation. Merchants quickly realized anger achieved little. Cooperation, or at least good-natured resignation, was usually more productive. Fraud attempts gradually decreased, at least temporarily, as respect for your skill grew. Still, vigilant you remained, never entirely relaxed, knowing another creative deception lurked just around the corner. Interestingly, fraud prevention inspired technological innovations in cheese weighing. Scales grew increasingly sophisticated, incorporating clever design features to prevent tampering. Imagine special locking mechanisms securing scale pans, intricate counterweights carefully adjusted daily, or hidden marks known only to weighers to detect tampering attempts instantly. Renaissance inventors, eager for patronage or prestige, regularly presented new gadgets claiming foolproof accuracy, some ingenious, others hilariously impractical. One memorable device involved a scale fitted with tiny bells that chimed pleasantly if balance was achieved, or alarmingly off-key if fraud was detected. While charmingly whimsical, these bells proved unreliable, chiming randomly even when no cheese was present, much to everyone's amusement. Cheese fraud scandals occasionally rocked city markets profoundly, triggering crackdowns by vigilant authorities. Picture city officials conducting sudden raids, dramatically inspecting cheeses with grim seriousness, attempting to deter future fraud. Merchants would hurriedly hide suspicious wheels beneath stalls, though not always quickly enough. Some ended up sheepishly explaining suspiciously heavy cheeses to scowling magistrates. Historians still debate whether these crackdowns genuinely reduced fraud or merely temporarily drove deceit underground, merchants becoming even more inventive to evade detection. Despite fraud, your relationships with merchants typically remained cordial, even friendly. They understood your role was essential, keeping markets fair and trustworthy. You, meanwhile, understood their struggles, the thin margins they navigated daily. You both shared mutual respect, forged by countless interactions at your scales, forming a subtle yet meaningful bond built on fairness, humor, and occasional exasperation. By day's end, packing away your scales, you reflected briefly on this quirky, never-ending game of detection and deception. Your vigilance quietly contributed to market stability, civic trust, and a curious kind of communal pride. Merchants respected your skill, townsfolk appreciated your fairness, and even city officials, grudgingly perhaps, recognized your quiet authority. Tonight, as you drift closer to sleep, let your mind gently wander through these amusing yet meaningful encounters, picturing Giorgio's sheepish grin, laughing crowds, innovative scales chiming gently, and your own calm yet vigilant presence at the heart of it all. Fraud attempts might never entirely vanish, yet your steady dedication ensured commerce remained fair, cheese remained delicious, and daily life continued peacefully. Rest deeply now, knowing further delightful tales await in sections ahead, gently waiting to amuse and comfort once you've slept. Imagine for a moment that you've decided, against all rational advice from your Renaissance-era parents, to become an official cheese weigher, It's a respectable profession, they argue cautiously, but do you really want to spend your life measuring dairy products? Nevertheless, determined to follow your passion, or perhaps just intrigued by the free samples, you begin your journey towards becoming an official weigher. But first, you face an unexpected hurdle. The official cheese weighing examination, a surprisingly elaborate and absurdly detailed test that weeds out the casual enthusiasts from the truly dedicated dairy devotees. Picture yourself stepping nervously into a grand city hall, the air thick with anticipation and the lingering scent of old parchment. Around you, fellow candidates shuffle anxiously, each clutching notebooks filled with painstakingly copied cheese-weighing regulations. You overhear whispered debates. Is Parmesan weighed differently than Pecorino? And what's the precise ounce measurement used in Modena again? Questions reflecting the genuinely bewildering complexity of this examination. You sit at a small wooden table, heart pounding lightly as examiners, stern city officials dressed in somber robes, each holding clipboards intimidatingly filled with notes, begin distributing written tests. The questions range from straightforward, list the official weights for cheese varieties produced in your city-state, to absurdly specific, explain the historical origins of local cheese-weighing rituals, including relevant civic ordinances and ecclesiastical decrees. Your pen scratches nervously across the parchment, wishing briefly you'd chosen a simpler profession, like lion taming or juggling sharp objects. But the written portion is only the beginning. Afterward comes the practical examination. Imagine yourself standing before a long table, stacked high with cheeses of varying shapes, sizes, and suspicious weights. Examiners watch closely, faces impassive, as you carefully calibrate your scales. You delicately handle each wheel, testing your balance meticulously, recording measurements precisely, knowing each subtle mistake costs dearly. Nearby, fellow candidates mutter quietly to themselves, occasionally shooting panicked glances your way. Historians still debate whether the intimidating atmosphere genuinely reflected civic seriousness or simply amused board examiners, likely both. Next, you're asked to identify subtle irregularities hidden within wheels, detecting hollowed cavities, uneven curds, or cleverly concealed additives. Picture examiners observing silently, occasionally jotting ominous notes, increasing your anxiety exponentially. Each cheese wheel becomes a minor mystery to solve quickly, your senses sharply tuned to weight, texture, and even faint aromas, skills you'd honed unknowingly through years of casually snacking. Perhaps most nerve-wracking of all, though, is the final oral examination. You're seated, facing senior weighers, men whose reputations precede them, renowned for legendary precision and unwavering fairness. Their stern gazes fix firmly on you as questions begin rapid fire, ranging from simple procedural clarifications to obscure historical trivia. Imagine one examiner asking gravely, "In what year did our city adopt its current cheese-weighing regulations and under whose authority?" You answer, confidently, "We." Fidently, well, semi-confidently at least, hoping desperately your voice doesn't betray internal panic. Yet despite its nerve-wracking intensity, the examination had surprising warmth and humanity beneath its formality. Examiners, though outwardly stern, occasionally flashed gentle smiles, subtly reassuring nervous candidates. Some senior weighers even shared encouraging anecdotes, recalling their own anxiety-riddled examinations years earlier, reminding candidates gently that everyone began uncertainly. One particular story circulated among candidates involved a famously stern examiner, Signor Baldini, notorious for his uncompromisingly high standards. Yet surprisingly, Baldini occasionally softened, particularly when a candidate's nerves overwhelmed them. Rumor had it he'd quietly offer reassuring whispers, subtle nods, or gentle encouragement, reminding candidates to breathe, slow down, and trust their training. Historians still debate whether these tales reflect historical truth or merely hopeful folklore among nervous apprentices. Regardless, they reveal a comforting humanity behind intimidating rituals, reassuringly familiar to anyone who's faced high-pressure tests. Successful completion of this grueling examination marked the beginning, rather than the end, of your cheese weighing journey. Imagine the relief flooding your body upon passing, the joyous congratulations from friends and family, the quiet pride you felt pinning official insignia proudly onto your tunic. Yet even then, your education continued. Years spent apprenticing under veteran weighers, learning subtler skills, diplomacy, crowd management, conflict resolution, and occasionally even acting skills when managing dramatic disputes in the market square. Cheese weighers often joked privately about their training never ending, each day bringing fresh challenges requiring patience, humor, and occasionally improvisation. Imagine veteran weighers sharing humorous anecdotes, recounting absurd moments, like the timescales stubbornly refused balance, or the memorable afternoon spent chasing runaway cheeses through crowded market streets. Over time, you'd gradually evolve from anxious novice into seasoned expert, your knowledge becoming deep, instinctive, quietly impressive to merchants and townsfolk alike. You'd develop personal rituals, quiet habits, enhancing your precision, perhaps tapping scales 3 times before each measurement, carefully arranging cheese wheels by size or color, or whispering brief prayers, rituals marking your transition into respected community figure, quietly essential to market life. Tonight, as you drift gently towards sleep, let your mind softly explore this quiet journey, examinations overcome, skills gradually honed, humorous mishaps endured, and friendships gently forged amidst daily cheese-weighing rituals. Each small challenge surmounted marked growth, deepening your expertise, enriching your connection to community, quietly guiding your daily interactions. Sleep softly now, knowing comforting stories and gentle historical details await you in later sections, ready to amuse, reassure, and ease you deeper into peaceful rest. You've now earned your insignia, survived the dreaded cheese-weighing exam, and spent months shadowing veteran weighers who smelled faintly of aged gorgonzola and had the posture of men who'd spent decades bending over barrels. You've learned the rituals, mastered the scales, and even developed your signature way of nodding approvingly when a cheese lands just right on the mark. But what's truly unexpected is how your humble role begins to carry a strange, quiet prestige. Not the flashy kind, of course. No one's painting your portrait in a cathedral or composing sonnets in your honor, but in the cobbled streets of Florence, Parma, or Lucca, your presence carries weight, literally and figuratively. You begin to notice small signs. Merchants greet you with more warmth, their greetings tinged with respect. Townsfolk pause their errands to ask you about current cheese prices or to hear the latest scandal from the marketplace. Children wave when they see you pass. And when your name is mentioned at dinner tables, it's often followed by phrases like, "Now there's a man who can tell a real ricotta from a fraud at 20 paces." It turns out that being an official cheese weigher is something of a community anchor. You represent fairness, order, and a kind of delicious continuity. Every morning, as the sun filters through colorful awnings and the market wakes with clattering hooves and the aroma of rosemary bread, your stall becomes a gathering point. People trust you. Your impartial scale is seen as a neutral judge in a world that often feels a bit too chaotic. And then there's the fact that you, as a certified weigher, become quietly influential in shaping the local economy. Merchants alter their recipes and aging processes based on your feedback. If you raise an eyebrow at a crumbly wheel of fontina, the cheesemaker takes it back for another week of aging. If you smile at a particularly aromatic Asiago, it might become the talk of the town. Historians still argue whether cheese weighers directly influenced the development of regional cheese varieties or simply reflected existing trends. Some claim weighers shaped production methods by favoring certain characteristics, subtly guiding artisans toward specific textures, weights, and molds. Others believe that weighers were more reactive than proactive, echoing what the markets already preferred. Either way, your influence is undeniable. There's also a bit of politics involved, as you eventually discover. City councils often consult experienced weighers when adjusting trade tariffs or regulating food safety standards. You find yourself summoned occasionally to dark-paneled chambers filled with parchment scrolls, wax seals, and the soft clink of wine glasses. The officials speak in hushed tones about cheese quotas and merchant fairness, and you nod solemnly, trying to appear more authoritative than confused. And yes, there's some gossip, inevitably. Rival cheese weighers exist, some in neighbouring towns, others right in your own market. Picture Benedetto, for example, a tall man with a magnificent moustache and a dramatic flair that makes every wheel of cheese feel like a royal presentation. He weighs with theatrical pauses and speaks in flowery sentences. Townspeople love him, or love to talk about him, which frankly is the same thing. You and Benedetto share a polite rivalry. He prefers stricter tolerances. You favour context and a gentle touch. Occasionally, your names are invoked in spirited debates at wine taverns. Ah, but Lorenzo would have passed that wheel. Yes, and look where that got us, the great Pecorino scandal of last March. Still, beneath the competition lies camaraderie. You exchange tips with fellow weighers, share stories of strange cheese textures. I swear it squeaked when I poked it, and laugh over tales of irate vendors who blame their underweight wheels on humidity, witchcraft, or their cousin's bad luck. Despite all this, your daily work retains its humble rhythm. You arrive early, inspect your scales, and set them just so. The first merchant usually brings something simple, easing you into your duties like a gentle warm-up. Then comes a rush. Dozens of vendors, each with cheese wheels, wedges, bricks, and blocks, all hoping for your nod of approval. You take it all in stride, even enjoying the quiet sense of flow as your hands move with practiced certainty. There's even a kind of serenity to it. In a world of political unrest, unpredictable weather, and the occasional pirate raid, your work is comfortingly predictable. Cheese comes in, you weigh it, people react, ledger entries are made, time passes like warm honey. One day, a traveller approaches your stall, his accent foreign, his clothes dusted with the road. He watches quietly as you work, eyes flicking from the scales to the crowd, to the neat rows of cheese stacked beside you. "You weigh cheese?" he asks. You nod. "Every day?" You nod again. He pauses, then says, "It's peaceful, isn't it?" And you realize he's right. In this chaotic Renaissance world where alliances shift, fortunes rise and fall, and life is often unpredictable, you have something rare, a vocation that offers consistency, trust, and quiet pride. Tonight, as you settle into sleep, imagine yourself once again in the heart of that bustling marketplace, your scale gleaming, your parchment smooth, your hands steady. The world swirls around you, full of colour and noise, but your post remains calm, essential, and oddly poetic. And somewhere between the smell of aging Asiago and the gentle laughter of passers-by, you find yourself exactly where you're meant to be. But of course, where there's prestige, power, and wheels of salted dairy, corruption is never too far behind. As a now respected cheese weigher, you begin to notice things. A merchant who's unusually generous with compliments. A courier delivering a parcel to your home that contains a suspiciously fine wedge of truffle-infused pecorino, labelled as a thank you gift. A council member who chuckles nervously and says, "Surely that merchant's cheese passed the test. He's one of our more generous taxpayers." You quickly learn that the cheese world, like any other economic sphere, isn't always as clean as your perfectly balanced scales. Bribery, favoritism, and quiet backroom deals are more common than anyone would like to admit, and while you try to keep your nose clean, aside from the constant exposure to pungent dairy, the temptation is always there, wafting gently, like the scent of an aging taleggio. One of the more subtle forms of corruption is what merchants euphemistically call pre-weighing gifts. These come wrapped in silk napkins, tucked into the corners of your stall, usually something harmless, a small bottle of wine, a pokes, in a pouch of dried figs, a wedge of cheese that fell off the cart. The implication is never spoken aloud, but it hovers in the air like the tang of goat's milk on a warm afternoon. Historians still argue whether this gift-giving culture was true corruption or simply a well-meaning tradition. Some believe it fostered trust and goodwill between merchants and weighers. Others argue it was a slow rot at the core of the system, subtly influencing decisions under the guise of courtesy. Like most Renaissance institutions, the truth sits somewhere in the middle, fermented and complex. The more egregious examples, though, are impossible to ignore. You've heard stories of weighers who owned private cheese farms, conflicts of interest so blatant, it's a wonder they didn't wear signs reading, "Yes, I weigh my own cheese." Others accepted bribes to look the other way on fraudulent weights, approving cheese that clearly didn't meet city standards. A few even tampered with their own scales, adjusting them ever so slightly to favor certain vendors. And then there were the cheese mafias, yes, that's right. Not officially called that, of course, but merchant guilds that operated like cartels, controlling supply, pressuring competitors, and encouraging weighers to support their products. These groups often included wealthy families who viewed the cheese trade as both economic engine and social weapon. They didn't threaten you openly, but they didn't need to. A certain silence in the square when you passed, a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes, a cheese wheel delivered to your home, already weighed and sealed. You once encountered such a situation. A merchant whose wheels consistently weighed exactly the same every time. Too exact, suspiciously exact. When you gently questioned him, he chuckled and said, "Oh, we use only the finest cows blessed by monks. Their milk weighs with divine consistency." That might have been clever marketing, but your instincts told you otherwise, so you quietly recalibrated your scales, reweighed his cheese under tighter scrutiny, and discovered a discrepancy. Not large, but enough. The fallout was dramatic. The merchant was fined, his reputation bruised, his guild displeased. For weeks you noticed fewer customers at your store. A few vendors made snide remarks. Someone scrawled "traitor to cheese" on a wall near your home. But slowly, trust returned. People remembered why they respected you. And besides, that merchant had always worn far too much lavender cologne. The city took public corruption seriously, at least in theory. A special council oversaw the Office of Measurement, and they conducted periodic surprise inspections, often accompanied by official scribes and ceremonial trumpeters for dramatic effect. You'd be at your post mid-weighing when suddenly 3 men in red robes and feathers would appear, announcing a formal audit. It was all very theatrical, part accountability, part civic pageantry. One particularly memorable inspection involved a goat wandering into the audit and refusing to leave until it was bribed with a block of fontina. Despite these occasional scandals, most cheese weighers held themselves to a high standard. They understood their role as moral stewards of the market. A dishonest weigher could disrupt trade, cause unrest, even incite protests. In one town, Bergamo if memory serves, a widespread cheese fraud led to a week-long boycott of dairy products. The resulting economic dip was so severe that local officials considered banning soft cheeses altogether, a suggestion that caused such outrage it was rescinded within hours. But not all corruption wore dark cloaks and twirled moustaches. Sometimes it arrived in softer forms, the daughter of a cheese merchant asking you to dance at a festival, a wealthy patron offering to sponsor your son's apprenticeship, no strings attached, of course, a charming letter praising your work, hinting at future political opportunities if you'd just be a bit more flexible during the next weighing season. You learn to navigate these situations delicately, a polite smile, a diplomatic decline, a reputation maintained through a careful balance of grace and backbone. You keep your records neat, your scales clean, your conscience as unsullied as a fresh wheel of buffalo mozzarella, and through it all, you remain a figure of steady fairness. Corruption may swirl around the edges, but your little square of stone in the marketplace remains a place of clarity and calm, a patch of sunlight where people come to seek honesty and maybe a good joke about blue cheese. So tonight, as you sink deeper into the comfort of your blankets, imagine your scale resting beside you, silent, sturdy, and true. The market is quiet now, the day's noise faded into the soft echo of footsteps and laughter. You did your job, you kept things fair. And even in a world of quiet bribes and subtle temptations, you remained balanced. just like your cheese. The sun peeks over the terracotta rooftops, casting warm light on the sleepy stone streets below. As you make your way toward the market for another day at your scales, there's a new energy in the air. Not a festival exactly, but something rarer. The Cheese Enforcement Patrol is making their rounds today. Yes, that's right. Renaissance. Italy had a small but remarkably serious corps of officials whose sole purpose was to enforce cheese law. Picture a trio of stern-faced men in matching woolen cloaks, city crests stitched over their hearts, walking purposefully through narrow alleyways. They're not here to smile, sample, or socialize. They're the municipal enforcers of proper cheese weighing, and they take their job with the deadly seriousness of men who once arrested a man for selling Gouda disguised as provolone. True story, hard to say, but the phrase provocative provolone scandal still lingers in the local gossip. These inspectors work closely with people like you. When they arrive at your stall, you greet them with a formal nod, opening your ledgers and gesturing to your meticulously organized stacks of cheese. They glance through your records with careful eyes, fingers tracing columns of weights and merchant names. Their faces rarely betray emotion, unless, of course, they spot an error. Then it's a sharp intake of breath, a raised eyebrow, and a pen dipped in crimson ink, a color that sends chills down the spine of even the most confident weigher. But you're prepared. Your scales are clean, your weights are precisely filed, and your hands don't tremble when placing the test cheese, an imported wheel of slightly suspect Swiss, onto the official inspection scale. It balances perfectly. One inspector grunts in approval, another nods slowly, the third scribbles a note and moves on, leaving behind only the faint scent of waxed parchment and silent judgment. Historians still argue whether this layer of cheese law enforcement was truly necessary, or if it was more about civic pride than economic protection. One camp believes these patrols were vital, deterring fraud and ensuring stability in markets where cheese carried more weight, pun fully intended, than coin. Others suggest it was just another way for cities to flex bureaucratic muscle, proving they could control even the most fragrant aspects of trade. But whatever the motivation, the cheese police, as townsfolk jokingly called them, had real power. They could fine merchants, confiscate suspect wheels, and even temporarily suspend the licenses of weighers who failed to meet standards. You once saw a fellow weigher, young and overly confident, try to argue his way out of a fine after misreporting a shipment of sheep's milk cheese. The inspectors were unmoved. His stall sat empty for a week. The lesson lingered. Beyond the official patrols, however, there was an even stranger development: the rise of the unofficial cheese police. These weren't city officials or taxmen. These were passionate townspeople, often older women, former cheesemakers, or retired traders, who appointed themselves as guardians of cheese justice. They'd walk the markets with baskets on their arms and judgment in their eyes, inspecting wheels with a sniff, a squeeze, or a disapproving tisk. Their knowledge was astonishing. They could identify spoiled curds by scent alone. They remembered which merchant sold sour fontina during last year's rainstorm. And they were never, ever fooled by cosmetic rinds or decorative herbs. You had a particularly memorable run-in with one such woman, Nonna Lucrezia, a tiny figure in black lace with a voice that could cut through granite. She approached your scale one morning, silent as a shadow, and placed a wedge of cheese on your counter. "This," she said, "smelled wrong by the olive stall. Prove me right." You weighed it, you examined the cut, you even performed the little vinegar salt test you'd learned from an old manuscript. Sure enough, the cheese was cleverly aged to appear fresher than it was. You nodded solemnly. Lucrezia simply said, and disappeared back into the crowd like a vigilante ghost of cheese quality. To this day, you're not sure if she was real or some spirit conjured by your own conscience. But in truth, these self-appointed enforcers did the city a great service. They helped maintain standards, encouraged vigilance, and, perhaps most importantly, ensured that no one ever got too comfortable in their craft. Their presence reminded you that every wheel of cheese carried not just weight, but meaning. It was a symbol of pride, of tradition, of nourishment, And cheating that, even by an ounce, meant more than lost coin. It meant breaking trust. Enforcement wasn't just about catching fraud. It was about preserving faith in the system. You've seen how one scandal, one tampered scale or mislabeled cheese, could ripple through the marketplace. Buyers would become suspicious, merchants would turn defensive, and the fragile harmony of honey of daily trade, would splinter into accusation and doubt. But when the system worked, oh, it sang. Picture the hum of voices, the clink of coins, the creak of carts rolling in with fresh dairy from hillside farms. Imagine the comfort people felt seeing your stall standing firm, scales steady, ledgers open. Trust wasn't built overnight. It was earned, one honest weighing at a time. So tonight, as the world slows around you and your thoughts begin to drift, let yourself sink into the memory of that small, stone-paved square where justice arrived not with swords but with carefully measured cheese, and where guardians of fairness wore aprons instead of armor. Let that sense of balance soothe you now, the idea that in at least one corner of the world, honesty could be measured to the ounce, and truth smelled faintly of cave-aged ricotta. You awaken to the soft rattle of carts being pulled into the square, wheels clacking on cobblestone, as the sun creeps over the rooftops. Another day begins, and with it comes not only your weighing duties, but something more flavorful. Today you're not just balancing the scales, you're acting as an ambassador for the varied, sometimes wildly eccentric, regional cheese varieties that define Renaissance Italy. Because while your job is rooted in precision, it's also, unexpectedly, about storytelling. Each cheese wheel you weigh carries with it a tale of the land, the animals, the weather, and the stubbornness of local tradition. Florence has its buttery, soft-rind caciotta. Modena boasts its sharp sheep's milk pecorino, aged in straw. Down in Puglia, farmers bring up wheels of pungent ricotta forte, its smell capable of clearing a stall if unwrapped too quickly. And don't even get started on Sardinian cheeses, which are so bold and strange. They occasionally involve live insect larvae. And no, you don't weigh those without gloves. Your scales become the stage where these regional cheeses perform. When a merchant arrives from Parma, hauling a wheel of fragrant Parmigiano Reggiano the size of a carriage wheel, the crowd gathers. This isn't just about weight. It's a moment of pride, a presentation, a delicious declaration of identity. You lift the wheel, feel its density, its subtle texture. You murmur something complimentary about the rind. The merchant beams. Nearby spectators nod approvingly, as if the cheese has passed an invisible test of dignity. And in a way it has. Your job, ostensibly focused on mass and measurement, has gradually expanded. You've become an informal cheese historian. Townsfolk come to you with questions. What's the difference between Tuscan and Roman pecorino? Which goat cheeses are best in spring? Is it true that Venetian cheesemakers rub their wheels with rosemary oil to keep away mold and pirates? Historians still argue whether Renaissance cheese weighers like you actively influenced the evolution of regional cheese traditions or merely preserved them by enforcing their definitions. Some suggest you were cultural gatekeepers, ensuring, through inspection, that a cheese labelled Lombard truly represented Lombardy's climate, animal feed, and aging techniques. Others think you were just passive bureaucrats with a really good sense of smell. But from where you stand, it feels like a bit of both. There's something deeply satisfying about seeing the spectrum of Italy's cheeses unfold before you. You begin to notice subtleties, the faint floral scent of alpine milk, the yellowish tint that hints at springtime pastures, the tight, granular structure of a properly aged wheel. You can guess the region by the shape of the rind alone. You become, slowly and somewhat unintentionally, a cheese sommelier without the fanfare. There are even trends, though no one calls them that. You notice a growing popularity in firmer textures. You see more cheeses being brined with herbs or aged in wine-soaked cloth. You watch as regional experiments slowly migrate to other towns, carried by merchants eager to try something new. And though you don't craft the cheese yourself, your approval can shape which of these new creations gain favor or fade away into crumbly obscurity. Some merchants seek you out specifically for your opinion. "It's a new blend," they say nervously, placing a wheel before you. Goat's milk with saffron. The herds graze near the coast now. It changes the flavor. Try it? You do, not because it's your job, but because you're curious. And when you nod thoughtfully, offer a few words of praise, the merchant's relief is visible. You're not just a judge, you're an ally, an unwitting promoter of innovation. Sometimes things go sideways. You once weighed a cheese from Calabria so aggressively spiced with chili that your fingers burned for an hour after handling the rind. Another time, you rejected a cheese made with both cow and donkey milk. A bold attempt, perhaps, but one that tasted like regret and shoe leather. Yet even these failures are instructive. They remind you that regional tradition isn't static. It's alive, shaped by weather, trade routes, and the strange whims of cheesemakers who dream in curds and brine. And of course, there are the stories. One day, a merchant from a distant hillside village arrives with a cheese you've never seen before. Small, round, wrapped in bark with a fragrance of pine and something almost citrusy. He tells you it's made only by 3 families, using milk from a rare breed of goat that feeds on lemon blossoms and mountain thyme. You weigh it. It's just under the expected limit, but the craftsmanship is exquisite. You approve it anyway. That decision spreads quickly. Within weeks, other merchants are asking about the lemon blossom cheese. The weigher liked it, they say. It must be good. And in that small moment, you realize your influence again. Not political, not financial, but cultural. You don't just uphold standards, you quietly help define them. So as the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across your ledger, and the last wheel is placed gently on your scales, you look around the square with quiet satisfaction. The stalls are winding down, families are packing up, and the scent of cheese still hangs in the warm evening air. Another day of tasting, measuring, preserving, and, without quite meaning to, shaping the culinary map of Italy has come to a close. Tonight, as your thoughts soften and your breath deepens, imagine the varied landscapes that gave birth to those cheeses, the hillsides dotted with sheep, the alpine meadows filled with wild herbs, the coastal breezes that kiss the goat's fur, and you, standing calmly amid it all, a quiet sentinel of flavor and fairness. Let those peaceful images cradle you now. Sleep easy, knowing that your scales did more than balance weight. They helped balance a whole world of tradition, taste, and time. It's a particularly warm afternoon in the market square, and you've just finished weighing a particularly stubborn wheel of provolone that had to be repositioned 3 times before the scale would sit right. As you sip from a modest cup of watered wine and stretch your sore shoulders, a familiar voice calls out from behind a cart of apricots. "Tax day's coming," the merchant says grimly, pushing forward a cart stacked with small bricks of sharp, dry goat cheese. You know how they get. And indeed you do, because in Renaissance Italy, cheese wasn't just a delightful snack or a fragrant symbol of local pride. It was taxable, heavily so. And that meant you, as the official cheese weigher, stood at the trembling heart of the entire revenue system. For better or worse, your scale was also a cash register. Most towns levied taxes on cheese in a variety of ways, some taxed by weight, others by volume, and a few, bless their complicated bureaucratic hearts, even taxed based on the number of rinds in a batch, because apparently someone thought counting was more honest than measuring. Your role in this process wasn't theoretical. You were responsible for determining the taxable value of every wheel, wedge, and sliver that passed through your hands. You weren't just weighing for quality, you were weighing for coin. The implications were enormous. A merchant with a slightly underweight wheel might pay significantly less in taxes. A slightly overweight batch, however, could result in fees so high the merchant would need to rethink next week's inventory. So every tilt of your scale, every flick of your pen in the ledger had financial consequences. That's why tax season always came with tension, raised voices, suspicious glances, and more than a few attempts to curry your favor with particularly generous wedges of brie-like sheep's milk cheese wrapped in fig leaves. Historians still argue whether this close tie between cheese weighing and tax collection helped or hurt the profession's integrity. Some suggest it made weighers more respected. Keep him happy, they'd say. He decides what the city takes. Others argue it invited corruption and resentment, painting cheese weighers as glorified tax agents rather than trusted officials. The truth, again, lies somewhere in the middle. You were trusted until you weren't, and you were appreciated until someone's bill came back too high. Every major city had its own elaborate taxation policy. In Bologna, there was a dedicated cheese tariff table posted in the main square, protected under glass like a sacred text. Merchants would gather around it and debate endlessly, is my cheese in category B or C? What if it was aged in olive oil? What if the goat had a cold? The taxmen were unmoved. They referred all final decisions to you, the weigher, the man with the scale and the legal authority to tip it either way. One memorable tax season, a dispute broke out over a shipment of Alpine cheeses delivered from the far north. The merchant insisted they were for religious use only, gifts for a visiting abbot, blessed, and not for sale. You, sensing a creative attempt to skirt fees, asked gently why there were so many. The abbot, the merchant replied solemnly, is very hungry. The crowd laughed. You did not. The tax was applied. It wasn't all confrontations, though. The system had its moments of quiet satisfaction. You recall helping a young cheese maker from a poor family get their batch classified under a new artisanal exemption policy. By proving their cheeses were handmade in batches of fewer than 12 wheels, they paid less. That week, the cheesemaker's mother brought you a pie. You didn't ask what was in it. You simply enjoyed it. Some cities used cheese taxes to fund civic projects. One town in Umbria paved its central square using funds collected from just 2 years of cheese revenue. A plaque still stands there, commemorating the bricks that cheese built. Elsewhere, cheese taxes supported hospitals, poor relief, and even theatrical performances, meaning your day-to-day weighing had ripple effects far beyond the marketplace. Of course, there were loopholes, always. Merchants became experts at exploiting grey areas. If tax only applied to aged cheese, they'd swear theirs was fresh. If tax was higher for cow's milk than goats, suddenly everyone's herd was a bit more caprine than bovine. And let's not forget the infamous cheese on loan scheme, where merchants would temporarily gift cheese to avoid tax, only to reclaim it later after inspection. One merchant even attempted to disguise taxed cheese as religious offerings, hoping divine immunity extended to dairy. You declined politely, noting that while the Lord may be forgiving, the city's tax code was decidedly less so. You kept your ledger scrupulously, columns for type, weight, merchant, and tax, each line written in steady, precise hand, each number double-checked. Mistakes weren't tolerated, not by the merchants, not by the city council, and not by your own relentless sense of duty. At the end of each tax season, you'd hand over your ledgers to the Chamber of Weights and Levies, a grand name for a dusty office full of ink-stained clerks. They'd pore over your records for weeks, issuing receipts, fines, and occasionally small commendations. You once received a note of thanks on thick, perfumed parchment. It smelled faintly of lavender and bureaucracy. Tonight, as you settle into your thoughts and close your eyes, picture your scales once again, not just as tools, but as symbols of fairness, of public trust, of the invisible systems that keep a city running. Cheese, strange as it may seem, held the power to fund fountains, light lanterns, feed the poor, and, on rare and glorious occasions, build a stage for an open-air opera about goats. Let that odd beauty carry you now. The idea that something so humble, so daily, so utterly delicious could also be civic duty, economic engine, and quiet legacy. And know that tomorrow your scales will weight once more, steady, honest, and ready to count every ounce that matters. There's a quiet murmur sweeping the square this morning. Something's afoot, and it smells suspiciously like scandal, with just a hint of goat cheese. You arrive at your stall to find an unusually large crowd gathered around the edges, whispering behind hands, eyebrows arched dramatically. Even the pigeons seem unusually nosy today. As you set your scales on the stone counter, a merchant sidles up to you and whispers, "Have you heard? The great cheese fraud has resurfaced." Ah, yes, that cheese fraud. It began innocently enough months ago, perhaps a year, depending on who's telling the story. A well-regarded merchant from the hills outside Siena had risen quickly through the ranks of local cheese fame, presenting wheel after wheel of consistently perfect weight, flavor, and appearance. His pecorino, in particular, was so symmetrical it could have been measured with a compass. At first, everyone praised his craftsmanship, but eventually people began to wonder, how could one man produce such perfection so consistently? In Italy? You were skeptical, of course. Cheese, for all its traditions and rituals, is a living thing. Slight variations are inevitable. No two goats eat exactly the same clover. No 2 days ripen milk in quite the same way. So you started keeping quiet notes in the margins of your ledger, slight anomalies in weight patterns, a peculiar scent to the rind, a tiny seam you noticed near the core of one wheel, as if it had been altered. Then came the tipping point. A rival merchant, less successful but infinitely more spiteful, lodged a formal complaint. The accusation that the pecorinos were counterfeit, either mixed with cheaper milk or worse, imported from elsewhere and relabeled as local. Historians still argue about the technical definition of cheese fraud. Was it about the ingredients, the aging method, the geographic origin? In your case, it became a thrilling mix of all three. You were asked to participate in the investigation, a role you accepted with a blend of civic pride and mild theatrical glee. You were given access to the merchant's storage cellars, accompanied by city guards and a rather self-important scribe who insisted on narrating every moment aloud. There, in the cool, humid chambers lined with wooden shelves, you performed your tests, weighing, measuring, scraping rind, even, though reluctantly, tasting. And the truth emerged layer by layer. The cheeses were being aged off-site, not in Siena at all, but in a port city to the west, where climate conditions and costs were more favorable. The milk, while still of reasonable quality, came from cows rather than sheep in at least one batch. And the worst offence? Some wheels were pre-weighed and sealed, their weights stamped with forged insignias that mimicked your own mark, right down to the tiny decorative swirl in the G. It was, in cheese terms, a betrayal on par with treason. The city erupted. Merchants demanded justice. Customers, horrified to think they'd been duped by mislabeled dairy, returned their wheels en masse. The local authorities held a public tribunal, one of those rare affairs that combined civic order with Renaissance spectacle. People brought picnics, children waved miniature wheels of cheese on sticks. Someone composed a song titled The Ballad of the Bogus Brie, even though it wasn't brie. You were called to testify, and you did so with clarity, fairness, and a tinge of sadness. You'd admired that merchant's work. You'd hoped, against your own better judgment, that it had all been real. The verdict was swift. His cheese license was revoked. His stalls were closed. His inventory, confiscated, was redistributed to orphanages, monasteries, and one particularly well-fed group of stray cats. But even after the merchant faded from the market scene, the aftershocks lingered. Now every time a merchant presents a cheese that's too perfect, you feel the crowd lean in slightly, eyes scanning for signs of deception. Your scale, once a quiet arbiter of truth, now commands more attention than ever. It's a stage, and each weighing is a performance with very real stakes. The upside? Public trust in your role has grown stronger. People know you don't just balance cheese, you balance justice. Merchants respect your inspections, even when they grumble about rejected wheels. And city officials have started asking for your opinion on broader matters, like whether to allow imported cheeses in festival contests. Your answer, for the record, not unless clearly labelled, and preferably with a sad trombone sound when disqualified. The downside? You now get anonymous letters under your stall, notes from unknown scribes pointing fingers at various merchants, accusing them of subtle frauds, rivalries, or simply having shifty eyes. Most are ridiculous. One claimed a cheesemaker had trained rats to rearrange scales at night. Another accused a nun of using magical basil to grow unnaturally large cheese wheels. Still, you read them all because somewhere between the nonsense, real mischief always hides. And what of the disgraced merchant? Some say he left town, assumed a new name, and now sells oils in Naples. Others claim he opened a secret cheese speakeasy. Invite only, no weighers allowed. There are even rumours that he's apprenticed under a foreign cheese master and is planning a dramatic comeback. You wouldn't be surprised. Cheese, after all, is a forgiving craft. With enough time and the right cultures, even mistakes can age into something worth tasting. Tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and the market falls into silence, you reflect not on the scandal itself, but on the strange power of your work. A simple tool, a silent table, a row of cheeses, and yet through them you uphold something much bigger than weight. You uphold trust. Let that thought settle into you now. Let the scandal fade. Let the laughter of the townsfolk and the drama of tribunal days become whispers in the dark. Because tomorrow your scale will still be there, still balanced, still honest, and ready once more to weigh what matters. As the dust settles from the scandal, you return to your quiet rhythm in the market, though whispers still flit through the air like flour in a bakery. And now a new curiosity has seized your fellow townsfolk. Not scandal this time, but a peculiar debate that's been simmering for years. The question? Whether some cheese weighers in subtle defiance or silent sabotage intentionally miscalibrated their scales. It sounds absurd at first. After all, who would dare? But the more you think about it, the more you realize the idea isn't entirely implausible. The tools are delicate, the stakes are high. The power to tip just 1 ounce heavier or lighter rests solely in your hands. You start to hear things. Little murmurs from merchants. Old Pietro's wheels always weigh light when Lorenzo's not working. Or, funny how Benedetto's friends seem to always get the lucky balance. Even weighers among yourselves joke, darkly, about a leaning scale tucked under a table, used only on rainy Tuesdays when inspectors aren't around. Historians still argue about whether deliberate miscalibration was widespread or simply the stuff of market myth. There are records, certainly, of scales being confiscated, recalibrated, and sometimes ceremonially burned. Yes, burned, as if the tools themselves had committed treason. But it's hard to say where clumsy mechanics end and quiet manipulation begins. The truth is, a scale can lie with shocking subtlety. Even a faint misalignment, a screw twisted just a fraction too tight, a counterweight polished a little too aggressively, can shift the result by several grams. Not enough to raise alarms, but enough to advantage one merchant over another, week after week. And those grams, they add up to Florin's reputation, trust. You remember a case from a few years back. A young weigher, Ambrogio, bright-eyed and overconfident, who suddenly became extremely popular with a group of cheesemakers from the southern hill towns. Their cheeses, once average, were suddenly always passing with flying colours. Rumours spread. One day, an inspector accidentally dropped Ambrogio's scale. It broke open, and inside, hidden beneath the brass fittings, was a sliver of added lead, just enough to shift the weight. Ambrogio was dismissed by sunset. You sometimes wonder whether that trick was Ambrogio's idea or someone else's suggestion. Maybe he simply inherited the modified scale and didn't question it. Or maybe, like all of you, he had a moment when the pressure to be fair collided with the pressure to stay light. The scale tips. Not just literally. But miscalibration wasn't always malicious. In fact, some weighers deliberately softened their scales in times of hardship. After a drought, a flood, a bad winter, when farmers struggled and the streets echoed with empty carts, some weighers chose mercy over math. They let a few wheels pass that maybe shouldn't have. They looked the other way on cheese, just shy of regulation. Not for bribes, but for kindness. You remember doing it once yourself. A young widow, Gianna, barely scraping by after her husband's accident, brought you a small, uneven wheel of fresh cheese. It was wet, underaged, too light, technically unfit for sale. But she looked at you with tired, honest eyes and said, If it doesn't pass, we won't eat this week. You weighed it. You marked it approved. She didn't thank you. She just nodded, quietly, and disappeared into the crowd. But the next day, a warm loaf of honey bread appeared on your stall. No note, no name, just the smell of gratitude. So you understand why some weighers might nudge the numbers. But still you hold yourself to a higher code, not out of pride, necessarily, but because in a world of shifting weights and whispered deals, someone has to stay steady. You've spent years fine-tuning your eye, your hands, your conscience. Your scale may tilt, but your heart cannot. And yet, you do wonder. Even now, after all this time, you sometimes recheck your tools in the quiet hours of dawn, not just for precision, but for certainty. You weigh test stones. You compare against the master weight, kept locked in the magistrate's archive, a cold, smooth relic known simply as the standard, its edges worn by hundreds of cautious hands. You lower it onto your scale and hold your breath as the pans settle. Still balanced, still honest, still yours. The idea that a weigher could mislead, intentionally or not, haunts some more than others. For you, it's a reminder that trust isn't inherited, it's earned every morning, every wheel, every ounce, and so, as the city sleeps and the stars stretch lazily across the night sky, you rest your hands on the old wooden counter one last time, eyes soft, smile faint. The scale before you is silent, unmoving, waiting for tomorrow's stories to arrive. Let that silence carry you into rest. Let the weight of questions grow light as dreams. And know that whatever tomorrow brings, trickery or truth, you will meet it with steadiness, one wheel at a time. Your tunic rustles softly as you step into the city's modest government hall, where walls are lined not with tapestries or heroic frescoes, but with ledgers, shelf after shelf of cheese records stretching back decades. Some are stained with oil, others singed at the corners from long extinguished lanterns, and a few are bound so tightly they creak when opened. This is where your world intersects with parchment, the archives of weight. Because in Renaissance Italy, everything had to be recorded. Every cheese you weighed, every merchant who passed your scale, every adjustment to standard weights, no matter how small or temporary. And it all ended up here, in the weighing archives, where scribes with ink-stained fingers spent their days cataloguing, cross-referencing and muttering to themselves about whether this or that wheel of pecorino was registered in ducat weight or the Florentine pound. You deliver your weekly ledger to a clerk who barely looks up, simply reaches out with one hand and replaces it with a fresh book. It smells faintly of goat leather and ink. You take a moment to glance at the margins. Someone's drawn a tiny sketch of a cow in the corner of the last page. The scribes get bored too. The archive itself is a marvel of quiet chaos. Narrow staircases lead to alcoves filled with mouldy documents and scrolls dating back to before the current Duke's grandfather ever sniffed a wheel of cheese. There are special records for misweight disputes, colour-coded entries for fines, and even a locked cabinet labelled Unverified Cheese Events, a name that sounds more like a travelling performance troupe than a bureaucracy. Historians still argue whether these cheese archives were purely administrative or whether they served a deeper, more political function. Some suggest the records were a way for cities to flex their civic muscles, proof of order and law proudly rolled out when dignitaries visited. Others think they were insurance policies. If a merchant ever challenged a tax or accused a weigher of corruption, the ledgers provided evidence or ammunition. As a weigher, you grow intimately familiar with the process. Each evening, by candlelight, you sit at your stall and write name, cheese type, declared weight, actual weight, tax assessed, your signature. No embellishment, no opinion. Just quiet, deliberate marks on parchment. The act becomes meditative, a closing ritual. Over time, your handwriting becomes known, recognized even. Another clerk once told you, "We know it's you by the little loop in your lowercase g." It was meant as a compliment, though it made you slightly paranoid. Still, there's something oddly comforting about knowing that decades from now someone might open one of your books and see your careful notations. A small, enduring legacy in a world where most things melt away. Some of your fellow weighers take great pride in their entries. One man, Fabiano in Venice, was known to scent his ledgers with lemon peel to keep moths away. Another, Giulietta in Ferrara, wrote in poetic verse, "2 wheels of goat cheese passed my scale. Their rinds were firm, their scent not stale." Her ledgers were less legible, but undeniably more entertaining. You once spent a winter afternoon reading old entries from a weigher long gone, his name barely legible on the spine of a crumbling book. His writing was brisk, efficient, but every so often, in the margins, he wrote things like, "Merchant seemed unusually sweaty," or "Suspiciously smooth rind today, investigate next week." You found yourself smiling. It felt like meeting an old friend across time, someone else who understood that behind every weight was a person, a motive, a tiny, edible story. And then there were the cheese disputes. Whole sections of the archives were dedicated to arguments. Merchants challenging weighings, weighers defending their records, councils deliberating over 42 grams of cheddar that may or may not have been wet at the time. These weren't just complaints, they were essays. Passionate, occasionally poetic, often petty. One dispute went on for 6 months and included witness statements, weather logs, and a diagram of cheese storage angles. It ended with both parties fined and a new rule established: all cheeses shall be weighed at ambient temperature, not having been chilled nor excessively basked in sunlight. You copied that rule into your personal handbook. You never forgot it. These archives, dusty and dense as they are, become your secret source of strength. When you question your memory, they remind you. When you need precedent, they provide it. And when merchants try to bluff, you gently remind them their last 4 transactions were documented, weighed, and signed by you. One autumn day, a magistrate invites you to assist with a particularly thorny investigation involving a shipment of Alpine cheese that changed hands 3 times without proper reweighing. You're led into a small chamber where a group of clerks spread out ledgers across a long oak table. They call you master weigher, which feels excessive but flattering. You pore over the books with them, following trails of ink like a detective. And eventually you find it, an entry misdated, a tax misapplied. The culprit wasn't fraudulent, just confused, but still, mystery solved. You go home that night more tired than usual, but also strangely satisfied. Not because you uncovered a grand crime, but because, through the simple act of recording weight after weight, you contributed to something larger, a system, a history, a record of how people lived, traded, and ate. So as the candles burn low and your own ledger closes for the night, imagine the books stacked high around you, silent testimonies to your quiet work. Let the thought of parchment and richment and ink drift gently through your dreams. There's peace in record keeping, in knowing that what you do leaves behind a trace, something real, something steady, and tomorrow, when the scales are set and the merchants return, you'll pick up your pen again, you'll weigh, you'll write, and the world somehow will keep its balance. This morning, before the mist has even lifted from the tiled rooftops, you receive an invitation, delivered not by clerk or city guard, but by a young altar boy gripping a scroll tied with blue ribbon. The wax seal bears the unmistakable symbol of the church, a cross nestled between sheaves of wheat and grapes. You sigh, half flattered, half concerned. You know what this means. The church wants to talk about cheese, because as unlikely as it sounds, the church played no small role in Renaissance cheese culture. Monasteries were major producers of cheese, especially in the countryside. Monks and nuns, bound by vows of simplicity and self-sufficiency, became surprisingly advanced dairy artisans. Their cheeses, made from goat, sheep, or cow milk, were not only sustenance, but also trade goods. And like all trade goods, they needed to be weighed. So you make your way to the church courtyard, where an elder abbot waits under the cool shadow of a stone cloister. He greets you warmly, but with that particular formality that always makes you feel underdressed and over-questioned. Beside him sits a wooden crate of cheeses, some neatly wrapped in muslin, others still damp from the cellar. "We'd like a review," he says. The sisters of San Bartolomeo think the brothers are misreporting their weights. Ha! A holy cheese feud. You kneel beside the crate, gently unwrap the first wheel, and place it on your travelling scale. It's slightly underweight, not dramatically so, but enough that a few eyebrows might rise. The abbot sighs. They've been trading it with local merchants at full declared weight. We can't have that. You nod. Even the Lord, it seems, expects accurate cheese math. Historians still debate just how much influence religious orders had over trade during this period. Some argue that monastic cheese production was strictly internal, meant for feeding their communities and aiding the poor. Others point to robust records, sales, tithes, and even export arrangements that suggest monasteries were as commercially savvy as any merchant guild. You've seen both sides. There are the kindly sisters who donate extra cheese to orphanages and beggars, cheeses so lovingly prepared they smell like buttered hope. And then there are the monks who argue over rind thickness like it's a theological issue. If the rind is blessed, one friar once asked you, does it still count toward the taxable weight? You didn't answer, you just weighed it. Some religious houses have developed their own weighing traditions. One convent insists all cheeses be weighed at dawn to capture the divine freshness. A rural monastery in the Apennines built a special stone scale set into their chapel wall, believing cheese weighed beside the altar would be more honest. Whether spiritual or just symbolic, these practices add a layer of ritual that even you, seasoned weigher that you are, find oddly comforting. Of course, the Church also taxed cheese, not for itself, but on behalf of heaven, or at least that's how they phrased it. Certain cities imposed religious levies on cheese sales, part of broader tithing systems, and naturally cheese was frequently used as an offering. You once weighed a wheel of soft robiola intended as a gift to a travelling bishop. It came wrapped in linen tied with gold thread and smelled faintly of violets. You still remember that weight, 2.3 libbre, just shy of perfection, but you approved it. You figured the bishop wouldn't mind. Then there were holy festivals, days of celebration when cheese flowed like wine. During certain saints' days, merchants donated their best wheels to local churches in exchange for blessings. You'd be asked to weigh the offerings, of course, and the church would make a great show of recording each donation in the Book of Generous Measures. A bit theatrical, perhaps, but you admired the calligraphy. And occasionally you'd be drawn into theological cheese disputes. One case, burned into your memory, involved a friar who claimed his cheese cured spiritual malaise. It has herbs, he said confidently. Herbs that lift the soul. The archbishop disagreed. It lifts prices, he grumbled. Your role was simple, just weigh the cheese, but somehow you were questioned like a philosopher. Does cheese made for healing weigh differently? They asked. If it's meant to soothe sorrow, is it lighter? You tried to keep a straight face. Straight. You really did. Despite the oddities, you find comfort in your interactions with the church. There's reverence in their approach to food, a sense of purpose that aligns surprisingly well with your own values. They remind you that cheese isn't just commerce, it's nourishment, tradition, an act of care. Whether aged by monks in quiet stone cellars or offered by townsfolk in humble baskets, cheese often bridges the gap between the physical and the sacred. Today, after finishing your weighing and updating the monastery's ledger, the abbot invites you to stay for the midday meal. You sit under a fig tree with the brothers and sisters eating bread, olives, and, of course, cheese. It's simple, humble, but perfect. And for a moment, as the sunlight filters through the leaves and the bell tolls softly in the distance, you feel something close to grace. That evening, as you return home, your scale feels lighter in your hands, not physically, but spiritually. The day has reminded you of something essential, that your work, quiet and methodical though it may be, touches lives in ways you'll never fully see. Let that thought cradle you now as you drift to sleep. Let the echoes of chanting monk and the scent of cellar-aged cheese drift gently through your dreams, for in your small acts of balance, you help sustain more than commerce. You sustain community. And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of holiness too. By the time you've served a full year as an official cheese weigher, a curious thing happens. People begin asking you questions that have absolutely nothing to do with weight. How do I know when to turn my aging wheel? Is it true that mules produce better cheese if they hear lute music during milking? Would you mind teaching my son how to become a cheese weigher like you? And that last one is how you find yourself leading your first apprentice. His name is Matteo. He's about 16, with more energy than attention span, and he smells permanently of straw and fresh ricotta. His father was a merchant, now retired, and his mother insists that Matteo do something honest with his hands, which has somehow led him to you and your ledgers. So now, in addition to weighing, recording, inspecting, and navigating the occasional ecclesiastical cheese feud, you're also a teacher. You don't mind, really. After all, someone taught you. And like most things in the Renaissance, cheese weighing wasn't just a job. It was a guild. The Weighers' Guild was never quite as flashy as the silk merchants or the sword makers. There were no grand galas or elaborate processions, but there was a clear structure, apprenticeship, journeymanship, and eventually, for those with patience, a full-fledged seat at the weighing table. It began, as so many things did, with cleaning. Matteo sweeps the stall, he organizes the scales, he oils the hinge screws and sorts the standardized weights by size, shape, and obscure etching. His fingers are constantly smudged with chalk and cheese rind, and more than once you've caught him using your official balance to weigh pebbles, just to check. You correct him gently, then show him how to test a scale using a goose feather and a dry coin, because if your scale can detect that difference, it can detect anything. Guild training is strict, not everyone makes it. The examination Matteo will one day face is no gentler than the one you endured, and perhaps even more thorough now that cheese scandals have become tabloid-worthy. He must learn weights and units not only from your city but from neighbouring towns too, memorising conversion charts that would make a mathematician cry into his inkwell. But more than the numbers, you teach him the subtleties, how to smell for cheese that's too fresh, how to spot rind tampering, how to keep a straight face when someone insists their 3.7 Libra wheel felt like 5 at home, how to handle customers who shout and those who flirt. Historians still argue whether the Weighers' Guild existed independently in every city or operated as a more connected pan-Italian network. In your experience, it's a bit of both. Letters arrive every so often from other weighers, people you met once at a summit or heard about through the grapevine. They send stories, sketches of strange cheese shapes, and even new weighing methods. Once, someone from Genoa mailed you a schematic for a dual-hinge scale that folded into a travelling saddlebag. It broke on arrival, but the thought was nice. Occasionally, guild leaders hold gatherings, small conventions where weighers meet, drink too much, and argue cheerfully about balance theory. You once sat through a 2-hour debate over whether humidity should be factored into rind weight. It should, obviously, but only if the rind is more than 3 millimeters thick and you're south of the Arno, obviously. These gatherings are where you first hear about the 3-ledge rule, a bit of folklore among master weighers. Supposedly any cheese weigher who's trained 3 apprentices who go on to pass their own exams is granted a ceremonial cheese knife and the right to weigh without ledger for 1 day per year. You don't know if it's real, but Matteo lights up when you tell him. Tell him. Then I'll be your first, he says, with an earnestness that makes you smile in spite of yourself. You begin to trust him more. Let him handle the scale when the queue is light. Encourage him to make entries in your ledger. You even let him perform a full weighing once, start to finish, while you pretended to be a distracted merchant named Cesare. He got the weight wrong by 12 grams, but spotted a forged seal on the rind. You called it a win. And then there are the guild oaths. Before becoming a journeyman, every apprentice must stand before 3 full weighers, hand on the guild codex, and recite the weigher's promise. It's not dramatic, there are no torches or drums, but there's a gravity to it. The words speak of fairness, patience, humility, and the quiet courage of the balanced hand. You remember your own oath clearly. The way the stall smelled of rosemary that day. The tremor in your voice. The pride in your master's eyes. Matteo still has years to go before his turn, but already you see the spark, his questions becoming sharper, his observations more precise. He still makes jokes, still tosses pebbles into the empty scales when he thinks you're not looking. But slowly, surely, the rhythm of the work is settling into his bones. One afternoon, you catch him weighing his own lunch, a small wheel of fresh cheese wrapped in waxed paper. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Just curious? You nod. Did it pass? He grins. It was honest. That night, as the sun dips behind the bell towers and the shadows of the stalls stretch long across the cobblestones, you sit quietly beside your apprentice, watching the last of the cheese carts roll out. You say nothing. Neither does he. But the moment feels full, like a wheel aging in the dark, gathering depth, flavor, purpose. Let that warmth settle around you now. Let the memory of quiet mentorship and soft apprentice laughter soothe you to sleep. Because even the simplest tasks done with care carry weight, and teaching someone to measure with honesty. That may be the most important weight of all. You awaken before sunrise, as you often do, with the sound of wooden wheels creaking down the stone street below. But today is no ordinary market day. It's the start of the annual cheese fair. You can feel it in the air. There's a crispness, a kind of festive electricity that hums beneath the surface of the city. Flags have been hung from balconies. Bakers are already firing their ovens. And the cheese stalls, they're doubling in size. Some merchants even sleep beside their wheels the night before, afraid their prized creations will be moved, tampered with, or, most dreaded of all, weighed prematurely. For you, the cheese fair isn't just a celebration, it's an ordeal. A delicious, fragrant, crowded ordeal. Picture hundreds of cheeses lined in rows, gleaming under white cloth tents, each tagged with names that are half marketing, half poetry. Morning Blossom Wheel, St. Lucia's Ash-Rubbed Soft, 3-Day Goat Thunder. You couldn't make this up if you tried, and every one of them must be weighed. Why? Because the fair, while joyous, also awards prizes, medals for best texture, best weight-to-rind ratio, best innovation, and, perhaps most sought after, most faithfully represented region. In Renaissance Italy, that last category carried serious weight. A wheel that perfectly embodied the climate, culture, and craft of its place of origin was a source of pride not just for the maker, but for the entire town. You and your fellow weighers are stationed under a canopy near the center of the square. The table is freshly sanded, the scales polished until they shine like mirrors. A small banner flutters overhead, Ufficio Pesi e Formaggi, Office of Weights and Cheeses. Matteo, your apprentice, is practically vibrating with excitement. You've already reminded him twice not to weigh anything unless asked. He nods vigorously, then casually tests the balance with an apple, which you remove with a single raised eyebrow. The first entries arrive in wooden crates and linen-lined baskets. Some are enormous, so wide you need 3 people just to lift them onto the scale. Others are delicate, wrapped in herbs, bundled in hay, or sealed inside waxed pottery, like hidden treasure. One wheel arrives gilded in edible gold leaf. You sigh. The merchant smiles with far too many teeth. But amid the chaos, you settle into rhythm, weigh, record, inspect, approve, or disqualify. You find yourself becoming part judge, part diplomat. One merchant from Genoa insists his cheese is within regulation weight. The humidity in your city is throwing off the numbers, he argues. Another swears on his grandmother's grave that his Asiago has always weighed that much. You smile, nod, and gently point to the registered standard. Historians still debate whether fairs like these were about genuine celebration or thinly veiled commerce. Some say they fostered community, culinary exchange, and artisan pride. Others suggest they were more about bragging rights and under-the-table deals. You suspect, as always, it was both. You've certainly seen a few coins discreetly exchanged under stalls when judges weren't looking. One weigher in Pisa famously refused a bribe in the form of a miniature cheese wheel stuffed with florins, though in fairness he kept the cheese. As the fair continues, crowds swell. Music begins to play. Children dash between stalls, sticky with honey and crumbs. Matteo helps guide the younger merchants, offering tips on scale technique and rind inspection. You watch him closely, allowing yourself the smallest smile. He's learning. Then, just after midday, it happens. A loud crack. One of the merchant's massive aging wheels, a towering 5-year-old Parmesan from Bologna, splits right down the middle while being placed on the scale. It wasn't cut. It burst. A collective gasp echoes through the fair. Matteo freezes. You step forward calmly, inspecting the rind. A fracture line runs along the side, stress from improper storage. Perhaps it had been forced to age too fast, or left too long in dry air. Either way, it's disqualified. The merchant protests. You remain steady. It's a beautiful cheese, you say kindly, but it's unstable. It cannot represent the region if it cannot hold its own weight. The crowd murmurs its approval. Matteo exhales. Later that evening, after the prizes are awarded and the stalls are beginning to close, you find yourself invited to the ceremonial tasting table. It's an honor given only to the most senior weighers, and while your plate is modest, it is divine. Slivers of the finest wheels, fresh and aged, goat and cow and sheep, each carrying the scent of its birthplace. One cheese, a small, soft wheel infused with lavender and rosemary, nearly brings tears to your eyes. It's from a village you've never heard of, made by a woman who's never entered a fair before. You make a note to visit her next season. You end the day seated on the stone steps near the square, a warm breeze brushing past, the sounds of the fair winding down behind you. Matteo sits beside you, eating a final bite of crumbly blue. "Do you think we did well today?" he asks. You nod. "We kept the scales balanced. That's all we can ever do." Let that balance guide you now as you slip into dreams. Imagine the fair's soft lights fading, the clatter of wooden wheels rolling away, the last scent of sweet cheese in the air. You've done your part. The weights were honest, the records complete, and the world, for today, remained in balance. Long after the stalls have been packed away, and the last of the straw has been swept from the stones, the city begins to settle back into its usual rhythm. But beneath that calm surface, something strange stirs, a soft current of gossip, a handful of curious rumors, and at the center of it all, a cheese weigher, not you this time, but someone like you in a neighboring town. You first hear about it from a traveling merchant who stops at your stall, panting slightly from the road. "Did you hear about the weigher in Arezzo?" he asks, eyes wide. "They say he was caught forging weights, but not for money, for love." You blink. "Apparently he had feelings for a cheesemaker," the merchant continues, kept tipping the scales in her favor. Her cheeses always passed, too perfectly. Then one day, someone noticed. She won 3 festivals in a row, and suddenly the question started. Now, Renaissance Italy was not without its dramas, duels, feuds, excommunications, but a romantic cheese scandal, that's new. As the days pass, more details trickle in, some likely embroidered. Some say the weigher confessed to city officials. Others claim he vanished in the night. One version insists he left a poetic note, comparing her to a wheel of perfectly aged Montasio. You can't decide whether to laugh or sigh. Historians, in their usual divided fashion, still argue whether this story was ever true. Some cite old letters intercepted during routine tax audits, filled with passionate metaphors and veiled cheese references. Others dismiss the tale as marketplace theatre, invented by merchants bored of taxes and seeking entertainment. Either way, the story spreads like mold on a damp rind. You hear it told in 3 different taverns, each version more dramatic than the last. "It was a tragic love," says one man. "It was a political distraction," claims another. "It was just bad math," mutters a third, sipping his wine. Eventually, the tail lands at your stall. An older woman, leaning on a basket of lemons, says, "Well, if you ever fall in love, just don't do it near your scale." You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. Weights can lie, hearts can't. Despite yourself, you begin reflecting. There's a quiet intimacy in cheese weighing. Day after day, you handle what others have poured their lives into. Wheels aged for months, sometimes years. Milk gathered in the early morning morning fog. Rins brushed with salt and patience. These aren't just products, they're crafts, extensions of their makers. You've had moments of connection, of admiration, that soft glimmer in a cheesemaker's eye when their wheel lands perfectly on your scale, the brief touch of hands as you pass back a certificate, the shared smile over a wheel that's just right. Could you fall in love in the marketplace? Historians don't ask that, but perhaps they should. Because behind every wheel is a relationship, not just between maker and milk, but between people. Between the grower and the weigher, the seller and the buyer, the farmer and the fryer. And yes, maybe once in a rare while, the weigher and the cheesemaker. You remember once, years ago, when a young woman from the coast brought you her very first cheese. It was uneven, a little too salty, but it held something genuine. She waited nervously as you weighed it. Her eyes never left the scale. "It's light," you said gently, but honest. She smiled. That smile lingered in your thoughts for longer than you'd care to admit. She returned only once more. A better cheese, better balance, and then never again. You sometimes wonder where she went, whether she still makes cheese, whether she remembers you. Perhaps that's why the scandal from Arezzo strikes a chord. Because behind its absurdity is something familiar. A reminder that even in the most regulated systems, even amid taxes, ledgers, and inspections, human hearts still pulse beneath the surface. Imperfect, earnest, occasionally reckless. In your quieter moments now, you look at your scale and see more than brass and balance. You see stories, connections, hopes, maybe even longing. But you also see duty, because love is powerful, but so is fairness, and your scale must remain true. Not just for the merchants or the city officials, but for you, for your own peace. So tonight, as the story of the romantic cheese weigher drifts like smoke through the market stalls, you rest your hands on your scale, whisper a quiet "not today" to the wind, and smile. Let that smile follow you now into sleep. Let your thoughts wander gently through imagined letters scented with milk and thyme, through candlelit weighing booths and stolen glances. But let them return, always, to the stillness of your hands, the steadiness of your tools, and the quiet promise you keep, day after day, wheel after wheel. You're sitting at your usual place, the wooden stool that creaks familiarly under your weight, when something unusual catches your eye. It's not the cheese itself this time, but the man carrying it. He's dressed in foreign style, his tunic long and loosely belted, boots polished to a mirror sheen. He walks with confidence, yet glances about the marketplace like someone watching a play unfold. On his back, a bundle of wrapped goods, and in his arms, a wheel of cheese you don't recognize. Not just a variation, an entirely new shape, sheen, even smell. He approaches with a polite nod. "I am Henri," he says, "from Lyon." You raise an eyebrow. French. Henri carefully places his cheese on your scale. It's wrapped in a fine beeswax cloth, embossed with a strange crest, a lion with a fleur-de-lis tail. The scent that escapes is intense, earthy, bold, with a tinge of hay and cellar air. You begin weighing, noting the unfamiliar density, the strange shape, taller than it is wide, with an unusually soft center for its size. "I hope," Henry says with a smile, "that your city is ready for a new favorite." Ambition. You examine the wheel. The weight is slightly off, but within acceptable limits. The texture, well, it's certainly different. And the rind, cracked, but deliberately so, split by aging, not by mishandling. He hands you a parchment scroll, a letter of introduction. A merchant license, a wax-sealed note from the Duke of Savoy, no less, granting permission to sell in foreign cities. The crowd has begun to gather, of course. A foreign cheesemaker at your store. This is a spectacle. You clear your throat and announce the result. Approved for sale under visiting merchant status. A polite cheer. Henri bows. Later, as he unpacks his goods at a nearby stall, other merchants hover near your booth. They ask pointed questions. You let that cheese pass? It's not even from here. What if he undercuts our prices? He'll ruin the festival. And just like that, you're in the middle of a very old, very familiar situation. Foreign cheese, local tension. Historians still argue about the role travelling merchants played in the spread of food culture during the Renaissance. Some believe they enriched the culinary world, bringing spices, techniques, and cheeses that challenged the old guard. Others claim they disrupted economies, disrespected local traditions, and encouraged unfair competition. You've read both sides, but you also have your own experience to draw from. Henri's cheese isn't bad. In fact, it's daring. You admire that even if others don't, but you also understand the nervous muttering in the marketplace. Every wheel he sells is a wheel someone else doesn't. And in a city where cheese equals livelihood, every gram matters. The next morning you receive a summons. The Merchants' Guild wants to speak with you. You enter a stone chamber behind the council hall, the air cool and dense with incense and ink. A semicircle of officials, each in their guild robes, looks down at you. One clears his throat. About the Frenchman? You nod. Henri of Lyon. His cheese was unconventional. You resist the urge to say delicious. They ask about the weighing, about the legality of the license, about your decision to approve his stall. You answer each question calmly, referring to your ledger. No rules broken, no standards unmet. The silence after your explanation stretches longer than it needs to. Finally, the senior guildmaster exhales. Very well, but monitor him. And so you do. You stop by Henri's stall each morning. He greets you with a warm smile, offers samples, updates you on sales. The lavender-rubbed rind is selling well, he says. Too well, grumbles a nearby Italian merchant. But you begin to notice something surprising. A few local cheesemakers are adapting. One begins experimenting with ash-lined rinds. Another starts aging goat cheese in terracotta pots. Matteo, your apprentice, comes back one afternoon holding a cheese that smells of cloves. I think I can do this, he says. Something new, something ours. And it clicks. Henri's presence, while disruptive, has stirred something necessary. Evolution. That week, you weigh more experimental cheeses than you have in your entire career. Some are awful, wet, cracked, aggressively spiced. Others are promising. All of them are brave. The following month, the City Council updates the weighing code. It now includes a new category, foreign specialty, subject to standard weight, open to artisan innovation. Henri's cheese helped rewrite policy, and you quietly helped guide that moment. One evening, after the square has emptied, Henri stops by your stall. He hands you a small wrapped wedge. Not for sale, he says, just for you. You unwrap it later at home. It's a blend, half his recipe, half from local cows. A gesture, a bridge. You take a bite. It tastes like something old, and something just beginning. Let that taste stay with you now. Let the soft crumble of daring and the firm weight of tradition melt together in your thoughts. Change is not always disruption. Sometimes it's just a new wheel on an old scale. And your hands, steady as ever, are ready to weigh them all. You sit quietly at your stall the next morning, sipping your thin coffee from a ceramic mug that's seen better centuries, when Matteo rushes up with flushed cheeks and an excited glint in his eye. They're talking about you, he says, breathlessly. You raise an eyebrow. They usually are. No, really talking about you. Someone painted your likeness in the guild hall. You nearly spill your coffee. Matteo grabs your sleeve and practically drags you down the street, past the olive sellers and fig carts, until you reach the modest stone building that houses the city's artisan guilds. You've walked past it for years without ceremony, but today it feels different. Inside, the air smells of parchment, dust, and pride. Guildmasters nod as you pass. Someone mutters, "He's here?" And a few apprentices peek from behind ledger tables. You enter the main hall, and there it is, framed in walnut, lit from above by a narrow window, a painted panel. It's you, not exaggerated, not dramatic, just accurate. You're seated, head tilted slightly, hands poised over a well-worn scale. One wheel of cheese rests on the pan. The other pan is empty, delicately rising. A small ledger sits open beside you. The brushwork is clean, gentle, and honest. The plaque reads, "Lorenzo of the Scales, for years of fair balance and quiet wisdom." You exhale slowly. It's not grand. It's not gold. But it means more than any coin ever could. Historians often overlook these moments, the personal tributes, the small recognitions. But they matter, because behind every institution, every rule, every wheel of cheese, there are people. And today, someone has acknowledged yours. Later that week, your likeness becomes the subject of mild fascination. Children tug at their parents in the square. "That's him, the man from the picture." One merchant makes a joke about raising your prices. A rival weigher leaves a note on your stall. "Do I need to start dressing better?" And while the attention makes you chuckle, you soon return to your usual pace. The scales still need calibrating. The ledgers still need filling. The cheeses, God bless them, still wobble with unpredictable weights and unexpected aromas. But there's something different now. You find yourself thinking more about legacy, about what gets remembered. Not just in brushstrokes and guild halls, but in daily practice, in habits passed down, in tools kept well, in apprentices trained with care. You open your personal archive, a wooden chest tucked under your work table, and pull out your old ledgers. Years' worth of entries. Name after name. Weight after weight. Some written in your neatest script, others smudged by rain, by fatigue, or by nervous fingers gripping the edge of the page. Each entry tells a story. There's the wheel that cracked from too much sun but was still approved for its honest make. The disputed shipment from Venice that turned out to be mislabeled, not malicious. The merchant who swore you saved his business by spotting a forged insignia before he could sell a bad batch. And even the cheese that weighed perfectly but smelled like despair. You rejected it anyway. Some things, you'd argued, shouldn't be sold just because they meet a number. Matteo watches you quietly as you turn the pages. "Do you think I'll ever be in a painting?" he asks. You laugh. "Maybe, but only if you stop weighing apples." He grins. "What about the cheese?" "You're not ready for the cheese." Yet even as you joke, you begin making a small mental list. The first cheese he passed on his own, the time he spotted a fake weight marker, the way he started wiping down the scales without being asked. He's learning, becoming not just precise, but patient, not just skilled, but kind. And that perhaps is what you'd want remembered most. Not that you kept numbers straight, but that you kept people steady. That in a world tilting constantly under the weight of war, politics and pride, you helped people believe in something consistent, in the honesty of a tool, in the fairness of a table, in the simple truth of two scales in balance. That night, you take a walk along the city wall. The sky is pale lavender, the rooftops glow gold. Somewhere, music drifts up from a tavern. Somewhere else, a cheesemaker turns a wheel, gently in her aging room, hoping tomorrow's wait is kind. You pause, the wind tugs at your sleeves, and you whisper, just for yourself, let it be honest. Let those words rock you gently to sleep. Let your dreams carry you to painted halls and parchment records, to stalls filled with bright-eyed apprentices and laughing merchants. Let your legacy be not in how much you weighed, but in how well you did it. You arrive at the market earlier than usual today, the morning mist still curling around the base of the olive trees like lazy smoke. The square is quiet, save for the rhythmic creak of shutters being opened and the faint clatter of someone rearranging clay pots in the distance. You walk past empty stalls and sleeping carts until you reach your usual place, the flat stones beneath your feet still cool, your breath briefly visible in the air. But today, something's changed. A small group of children is gathered in a circle just beside your table. They're not playing, not running or shouting. Instead, they're watching something, or rather, someone. It's an old man, wrinkled, stooped, wrapped in a heavy shawl, despite the mild chill. Before him, a miniature scale, carved from wood and bone, placed delicately atop a box. He's telling a story. You catch the tail end of it. You grin. And so the weigher looked at the cheese, and he knew. It was light, but it was right, and that made all the difference. The children giggle. One claps. The old man gives a knowing nod and slowly begins to pack up. You watch silently for a moment, heart unexpectedly stirred. A cheese story, told to children in the square. And not one involving theft or fraud or scandal, but truth. You approach him. Where did you hear that? He looks up, smiles. Ah, that one? My uncle used to tell it. Said it was about a real weigher long ago. Might have been you. Might have been someone like you. You smile too. You help him gather his things. You don't say it aloud, but you're certain you once weighed cheese for that uncle. You remember the name, the nervousness, the gratitude. Later that day, you find yourself thinking about how stories last. Not records, not weights, but stories. And it's strange because so much of your life has been about documentation, ledgers, charts, official stamps, seals pressed into beeswax. And now, in your later years, you're beginning to wonder if the real legacy isn't the pages you've filled, but the people who remember how you made them feel. You think about the cheesemaker who whispered a thank you after her first fare, the child who asked if you'd ever weighed a wheel so big it needed a donkey, the mayor who once said your books were more trustworthy than his own treasury. Historians still argue whether daily tradesmen like you influenced the course of regional commerce, whether weighers mattered in the grand schemes of policy and empire. But those debates miss the point, because what matters isn't that you held the scale. What matters is how you held it, with patience, with humor, with care. And yes, sometimes with sharp correction, but always with an open mind. You begin to write in a new notebook, not weights this time, not taxes, memories. You jot down names, faces, moments, the cheese that arrived shaped like a crown, the apprentice who dropped a wheel and blamed it on divine intervention, the day someone gave you a cheese carved with your initials, the one time you laughed so hard during a weighing that your scale tipped, and the merchant refused to accept your apology until you bought him a fig tart. You fill 3 pages before lunch. By the end of the week, you've added a dozen more. Matteo notices and asks what you're doing. Building a different archive, you say. Of what? Everything the official records leave out. He nods, then, with the solemnity only a young man trying to act older can manage, says, I'd like to write in it too. And so you let him. He writes about a merchant with a crooked smile who always pretends not to understand the numbers. About the boy who tried to bribe him with cheese coins made from bread. About how you once told him that fairness wasn't the same as perfection. You smile as you read it. It's not elegant. It's not poetic. But it's honest, and that, in the end, is what matters. That night, you place the notebook in the small drawer under your stall, not locked, not hidden, just there, waiting for the next person, the next weigher, the next story. Let that image cradle you now. A small notebook filled with fragments of laughter and memory resting beside a well-used scale. Let the quiet echo of a morning story told to children follow you into sleep. Because sometimes the heaviest thing you carry isn't a wheel of cheese, but the weight of what it meant to be trusted. The rains arrive early this year. It begins with a soft drizzle, barely more than a whisper against the tiled roofs. Then slowly, steadily, the skies thicken into a woolen grey, and the streets turn to slick ribbons of stone. You watch the droplets bead along the edge of your stall's awning, counting them like beats in an unfamiliar song. Markets don't stop for rain, of course, neither does cheese, but everything moves slower. Carts wheel through puddles instead of dust. Merchants call out through damp scarves. You wrap your ledger in oiled cloth and dry your hands with a linen square that now smells permanently of sheep's milk and ink. It's on one of these wet mornings that the trouble begins. A young merchant, new to the trade, barely old enough to grow a proper beard, rolls up with a crate of wheels that look suspiciously perfect. Identical size, identical markings, identical weight, according to his breathless insistence. Too identical. You lift one, smooth, slightly too smooth. You sniff, sharp, then odd, like wax and something sweeter. You tap the rind. It sounds hollow. You split the wheel. Inside, not cheese, flour, pressed flour around a small core of real curd, dusted in white salt and sealed with rind. A fake. You hold it up to the merchant. He pales. I didn't know, he stammers. They came from a man in... But you already know, it started again. A counterfeit cheese ring. Historians still argue whether food fraud in Renaissance Italy was a systemic threat or simply a recurring irritation. Some claim entire supply chains were compromised. Others think it was local, opportunistic tricksters with too much time and wax on their hands. You, however, know the truth, because you've seen it before. 10 years ago, a similar case swept through the province, fake cheeses filled with clay and rice. One merchant even moulded a rind from hardened pig fat. You led the investigation back then, quietly, carefully, with a few trusted weighers and an unusually brave mule. That mule is retired now, but you're not. And so, quietly, you begin again. You gather samples, cross-check records, review entries from merchants who've weighed less than they claimed. Matteo helps, eyes wide with every strange rind he uncovers. You find a pattern, cheeses appearing suddenly, all from a fictional farm near Lake Trasimeno. The address? A dry well. You inform the guild. They give you a special seal, temporary authority, discretion advised. Now you're not just a cheese weigher, you're the unofficial head of the Formaggio Integrity Patrol, a title you invented, then laughed at, then secretly liked. Over the next week, you and Matteo move stall to stall. Not accusing, just observing, weighing carefully, asking subtle questions. You find them, 3 merchants with doctored wheels. All say they were duped. You believe 2 of them. The third sweats too easily. You track the shipments backward. Each leads to the same road. A supply route, hidden behind olive groves, leading to a modest barn that smells wrong even before you reach the door. Inside, crates of wax, buckets of curd, moulds shaped like popular wheels. And in the corner, a ledger, sloppy, rushed, but enough. You return to the guild that night, wet, muddy, triumphant. The fraud ring is disbanded, fines are levied. One weigher from a nearby town is quietly dismissed. His silence had been bought, his scale rigged. He was once a peer. You say nothing, but the look in your eyes says everything. Matteo watches all of it unfold. He doesn't speak until later that evening when you're walking home through the mist. How did you know? He asks. Cheese, you reply, doesn't lie. But people try to make it. You both laugh, a soft, tired laugh, the kind that says we did our job. That night, you sit by your hearth, the rain pattering steadily against the shutters. You remove your boots, stretch your sore back, and unwrap a small wheel from your private store. One you weighed yourself, one you trust. You cut it open, firm, nutty, honest. As the fire crackles low, you let your mind wander. Not to the frauds or the punishments, but to the quiet triumphs. The stall that now trusts again. The apprentice who saw what diligence could do. The market that feels just a little more balanced tonight. Let that warmth settle around you now. Let the rain's rhythm soothe your thoughts. Let your breath match the steady fall of drops against stone. And know this, even in storms your scales remain true. Even in fog your work brings clarity. And even when others falter, your hands, steady, worn, trusted, keep the balance. The days following the fraud investigation move with a peculiar quiet, like the city itself is exhaling. Markets return to their usual rhythm. Merchants nod at you with a little more respect, or perhaps a little more caution. And your scale, polished and new, sits like a silent sentinel over the square, bearing witness to the wheels that come and go. Matteo, still buzzing from the events, begins writing everything down. He claims it's for posterity, though you suspect it's also to impress the baker's daughter, who once asked him if he had an adventurous job. He underlined the word adventurous 3 times in his notes. One afternoon, after a particularly long string of standard weighings, Matteo looks up and asks, "Have you ever weighed something that wasn't cheese?" You blink. Of course. And then you begin to remember. There was the time, years ago, when the bishop's assistant asked you to weigh communion wafers, each required to be precisely the same for a holy ceremony. Or the time the city's apothecary brought in a block of medicinal wax, claiming it had to match the weight of a dried root from Damascus, and didn't trust his own scales. Or the midwife who came with a basket of swaddled linen and a stone, wanting to know if the newborn inside was thriving. You weighed them all, because trust in the weigher was not confined to cheese. During the Renaissance, official weighers sometimes doubled as impromptu inspectors, currency testers, and even evidence validators in court. Historians still argue whether this expansion of role was formalized or simply evolved out of need. But in cities like yours, where roles blurred and trust was rare, people turned to the person with the scale. Because scales didn't argue, they didn't take sides, they didn't flatter, they simply balanced. You recall the oddest request you ever received, a poet who asked you to weigh a bundle of letters. "Love," he explained dramatically, "must have its measure." You did it. The stack weighed just under 200 grams. He frowned. Too light. She won't believe it. Another time, a group of young artists brought a block of marble, chiseled roughly into the beginnings of a bust, and demanded to know its weight compared to a previous commission. "My patron insists it must be as weighty as his brother's." You told them it was heavier. They cheered. The bust was terrible. There's something delightful about these detours. They remind you that even though cheese has been your trade, weighing has always been your gift. The act of measuring, of translating substance into certainty. You share these stories with Matteo as you close up the stall that day. He laughs wide-eyed at the poet's complaint and nods solemnly when you mention the baby. "I never thought of the scale that way," he says. "As something beyond cheese." "It's never just about cheese," you reply. Later that week, the magistrate himself sends for you. Apparently, the city plans to erect a new bell for the southern tower, and a dispute has broken out between 2 smiths. Each claims the bell's clapper should be made from a different metal, arguing about resonance, weight, and tradition. Neither trusts the other's numbers, so naturally they call for the cheese weigher. You find yourself in a workshop that smells of soot and pride, standing before 2 slabs of metal, 1 iron, 1 bronze. The smiths glare at each other across the forge. You sigh, roll up your sleeves, and begin your assessment. It's not cheese, but it's honest work. The bronze is lighter, but more resonant, the iron more durable. You record the weights, check them twice, and deliver your findings. The final bell is cast with a bronze clapper and an iron rim, compromise, weighed, and sealed. When the bell finally rings, weeks later, clear and strong across the rooftops, you feel a small pride. Your scale, once again, has helped the city find its measure. That night, as you sit by your window, watching the tower glow golden in the last light, you reflect on this quiet truth. You may never write laws. You may never sculpt marble or compose sonnets, but your work holds all of them together. Because every craft, every belief, every trade needs someone to weigh it, to test its worth, to keep it honest. Let that thought carry you into sleep. Let the clang of the bell fade gently into silence, replaced by the soft, balanced rhythm of your own breath. Let your dreams hold both the weight of a newborn and the whimsy of a poet's letters. and know that what you do, what you've always done, matters. The first frost arrives in the night. You wake to find the market square glazed in silver. Cobblestones twinkle. Cloth awnings hang stiff with morning ice. Your breath fogs before your face, and even the pigeons look disgruntled, huddled together on the church eaves like old merchants, awaiting the warmth of a brazier. You pull your cloak tighter and make your way to the stall. It takes twice as long to set up. The weights are cold to the touch, the scale arms stiff with dew. You flex your fingers, warm them against a cup of thick chicory brew, and begin. Fewer merchants come in the winter, but the ones who do are serious, aged wheels wrapped tightly, hard cheeses meant to last through storms and snow. No more soft goat cheeses or lavender rubs. These wheels are stoic, reserved, cheeses with the soul of librarians. But even in the frost you find surprises. One merchant, a quiet woman from the hills, brings a wheel made not from cow's milk, but from chestnut-fed sheep. The result? Dense, rich, with a faint, nutty sweetness that lingers in the air like a memory. You weigh it carefully, perfect balance. She beams when you hand her the stamped certificate. "You're the only one who's ever believed in this recipe," she says. You simply nod. Then comes the firewood seller, an elderly man with more smoke in his beard than in his cart. He doesn't sell cheese, but he hands you a small, crumbling wedge from his pocket. Payment, he says, for a favour you did years ago. You don't remember the favour. He does. That's enough. The frost lingers for days. Each morning, Matteo arrives earlier, wrapped in a scarf so long it could serve as a tablecloth. "It's cold," he grumbles, "but it's quiet. I like it." Quiet days have their rhythm. The clang of the weights, the soft thud of a wheel settling onto the pan, the faint scribble of your pen across parchment. You find peace in the stillness. Fewer crowds mean longer conversations. Merchants bring stories with their cheeses, how they kept their cows warm, how they salted their brine, how they prayed the milk wouldn't freeze in the pail. Historians still argue whether winter cheeses were simply survival food or if they held symbolic meaning, protection against hardship, a ritual of endurance. In your experience, it's both. These wheels are dense not just with protein, but with memory. They carry the labour of early risings, of fog-drenched pastures, of careful cellars checked by candlelight. One wheel arrives with a message carved into the rind. "Formata, come home soon." You don't ask. You simply weigh it, wrap it gently, and pass it back. Some cheeses are more than food. They're letters. You and Matteo begin a new ritual, end-of-day tastings, just a sliver. You take notes in your private ledger, taste, texture, weight, story. Matteo adds sketches, most of which look nothing like cheese, but carry a certain enthusiastic charm. One resembles a very angry potato. You tell him so? He laughs and draws a hat on it. One evening, as snow flurries begin to fall, a monk stops by. He's carrying a wheel covered in ash and wrapped in leaves. "A gift," he says, simply. "From the abbey." You weigh it, you nod, but more than that, you remember. Years ago, during a different frost, you weighed for that abbey, gave them fair numbers when no one else would, declined their coin, told them to pay in spring. This, then, is their spring, even in snow. As the fire crackles in your home that night, you unwrap the monk's gift and cut a slice. It's sharp, clean, with a softness that lingers at the edges, a quiet cheese, a winter cheese, a thank you in edible form. You sit back, close your eyes, let it melt on your tongue. Let that quiet fill you now. Let the frost melt slowly into your bones, not with chill, but with stillness. Let the silence of snow-swept squares, of slow footfalls and gentle scales, carry you inward. Let your breath grow slow, grow. Let your hands rest. You rest. You've done your work. The winter has come, and still your scales remain true. The first thaw is subtle, a drip here, a softened edge there. The morning frost loosens its grip. Icicles retreat from eaves like shy guests leaving a party. Even the pigeons seem more optimistic, cooing with unusual enthusiasm from the rooftops. You notice it when you weigh your first spring wheel of the season. It arrives early, almost too early, wrapped in straw, shaped slightly uneven, as if the mold wasn't sure how to behave after months of hibernation. You place it gently on the scale. It teeters, settles. The weight is slightly off, but within reason. You make a note in the ledger. First thaw cheese. Nervous but promising, Matteo, cheered by the change in temperature, wears his scarf as a cape now. He's invented a cheese-based superhero. The Brevenger, he declares one morning, drawing a small mask on a rind of pecorino. You let it slide. Spring does strange things to people, but the thaw also brings something else. Letters, stacks of them from surrounding towns, requests for consultations, invitations to fairs, questions about weighing standards, even one offer to move permanently to a newer, larger city, better pay, better tools, more prestige. You read the last one twice. Then set it aside. The truth is, you're not sure you want more, not more bustle, not more pomp. What you have here is a rhythm, a stall, a scale, a place where people still look you in the eye and trust your hand. Still, you don't dismiss the letters. You consider them, quietly, even as you go about your work. Spring continues to bloom. The square brightens. Merchants return with fresh wheels, herbs pressed into the rinds, delicate cheeses rolled in flower petals, cheeses that crumble like thawed snow, cheeses that feel like opening windows after too long in the dark. Historians have long puzzled over spring festivals in small towns like yours. Some claim they were simply excuses to clear inventory. Others insist they were spiritual rituals, celebrations of fertility, sunlight, and the return of goats from winter pasture. You suspect it's both, and also neither. Sometimes people just want to taste something new. You and Matteo begin preparing for the festival early. You polish the scale, ink new ledgers, hang a small garland above the weighing booth. Not standard practice, but no one complains. And then, just days before the festival, an unexpected guest arrives. She steps into your stall mid-morning. Travel-worn cloak, hair streaked with silver, a small wheel of cheese tucked under one arm. It takes you a moment, then you remember. Her. The woman from years ago, the one who brought you her first cheese, the one you hadn't seen since. You both pause. The moment stretches, then she smiles. "I thought you'd retired," she says. "I thought you'd moved north." "I did." She unwraps the wheel. It's modest, unpretentious. The rind cracked in one place. The weight, slightly under. You nod. "Still light, still honest." She laughs. "Still your line." You weigh the cheese, approve it. Then cut 2 slivers and pass one across the table. You eat in silence. The flavor is soft, earthy, hopeful, like spring's first breath. She lingers a while. You talk, not just about cheese, about weather, roads, books, losses, gains, time, the world. You don't mention the letters. She doesn't ask why you stayed. When she leaves, she turns once. "Same stall next year?" You nod. Same stall. That evening, Matteo catches you humming. He raises an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Just spring." He doesn't understand, not yet, but he will. Let that feeling fill you now. The thaw, the slowness becoming momentum, the possibility peeking through like green shoots in cobblestone cracks. Let your breath move with it, warm, soft, steady. You don't need to chase change, you simply need to welcome it. By late spring, the square feels reborn. The cobblestones are warm by mid-morning. The air smells of rosemary, yeast, and sun-soaked linens. You can hear music again, not from a distant tavern, but from windows flung open to catch the breeze. To drifts from balconies, the pigeons have resumed their arrogant pacing. Life, it seems, has returned in full. And with it come the visitors, not just merchants, but travellers, scholars from Siena, sailors from Genoa, a trio of Germans with massive hats and uncertain Italian. One insists on calling all cheese Käse, regardless of type. Another carries a notebook and sketches your scale with alarming accuracy. They come, they watch, they sniff, cheeses cautiously. Some bring samples from abroad. You weigh a crumbly alpine wheel packed in straw and laced with herbs you can't quite name. You taste a smoky slab from the Pyrenees that makes your eyes water. Matteo, ever eager, declares it haunting, like a cheese with secrets. Foreigners asking local questions, locals pretending they've always liked foreign cheese. There's curiosity now where once there was suspicion. Historians still debate whether Renaissance Italy was truly open to foreign influence or merely tolerant when profit was involved. Some argue trade bred cultural expansion. Others insist it only deepened local pride. You see both. One afternoon, a French monk named Armand approaches your stall. He wears the same brown robes as the local brothers, but his accent sings with vowels that spill like cream. He lays down a wheel wrapped in beeswax cloth. "Monastic, 4 years aged," he says proudly. "You will find its centre more holy than any sermon." You smile politely, then you cut it, and the scent that spills out is transcendent. You weigh it, heavy but even, balanced. You nod, approved. He bows deeply, then lingers. "May I ask something?" "Of course." "Why do your scales sit higher than most?" You blink. Look at your tools. Your scale is slightly raised, set atop a shallow platform. You'd done that years ago after a backache. Never thought twice about it. "To see better," you say finally. He smiles. "Good answer." Later, Matteo asks what the monk wanted. A reminder, you say, that even the small things, like where you place your scale, matter, because they do. Position affects perception, elevation affects trust. People believe more in something that stands above. You hadn't meant to create that impression, but over the years, it's worked. The slight lift has made people feel seen. And now, foreign travellers photograph your setup. A woman with a sketchbook asks if she can draw you midway. You freeze awkwardly. Matteo tries to pose you. You swat his hand away. The sketch ends up charmingly crooked. A Flemish merchant brings a translated copy of your weighing ledger to compare with his town's system. You flip through it. Their units are different. The structure strange, but at the core it's the same. A balance, a hope for fairness, a desire to trust. He points to your signature at the bottom of your page. "You always sign the weights?" You nod. "It means I stand by them." He nods back. "We don't. But maybe we should." And there it is again. Influence. Not from grand speeches, but from small habits. The height of a scale. The stroke of a pen. As the days grow longer, you receive word that one of your old apprentices has become the lead weigher in Florence. Another now oversees inspections for a monastery in the hills. Matteo begins receiving letters addressed not just to you, but to both of you, to the weighers of our trust. It makes you pause, because in the early years it was just you and the tools. Now your name means something beyond your own hands. A symbol. A shorthand for consistency, for fairness. One evening, as the sun sets in rose-gold tones across the square, you take your scale apart, just briefly, to oil its hinges. Matteo watches. You ever think someone will take over your stall one day? You nod slowly. Someone will. Someone always does. He doesn't say anything more, just hands you the polishing cloth. He's gentle with the brass. That night, you sleep deeply. No dreams of fraud or frost or fame. Just the soft feeling of hands, continuing work you began. Of travellers taking stories home. Of your balance, extending outward. Let that quiet satisfaction cradle you now. Let your breath match the turning of the wheel. The way seasons shift, the way stories spread, the way one fair weighing can ripple through 100 towns. You've placed your scale just right. And people have noticed. By midsummer the city hums. The square glows with sun-warmed stone, colours more vivid now. Terracotta awnings, cobalt tunics, citrus stacked in baskets like tiny suns. You can hear fountains running full tilt, pigeons arguing over crumbs, and children playing games that somehow always involve yelling and falling. It's market day again, and as always, your stall waits. The wood's a little worn now, the scale polished to a gentle shine. Your ledger is nearly full. You've switched to a finer quill. Your old one finally gave out after years of faithful service. You let Matteo keep it. He tucks it behind his ear like a badge of honor. Today, something else arrives. A package, not cheese, a letter, sealed in blue wax, marked with the crest of the Grand City Archive. You slice it open and read slowly. They want your records, not all of them, just selections. Excerpts, weights, notes, maybe a page of observations. For preservation, they say, for future study. You sit with that for a moment, your handwriting, your tiny notations about cracked rinds and curious flavors will sit on a shelf beside histories of war and treaties and architecture. It feels absurd and exactly right, because you've always known the truth. The real story of a place is in its habits, in what people grow, trade, argue over. In what they weigh, historians still argue whether documents like yours are primary sources or simply market TI, market trivia. But the best ones know that behind every council edict lies a cheese that funded it, a weigher who certified it, and a scale that made it real. You agree to send the pages. Select your entries carefully. 1 spring cheese, 1 fraud case, 1 festival week, and, of course, a copy of the monk's ash-wrapped cheese, which you label simply Holy Rind. Smelled like absolution. Matteo helps pack them. He's quiet, but you see the pride in his movements. Think they'll display your name? He asks. Doesn't matter. It kinda does. You smile a little. What matters more is that someone, years from now, might read your notes and taste the world you lived in. Might see the numbers and feel the warmth of the day, the chill of the cellar, the scent of nutmeg on a soft wheel from the south. Might understand that even something as ordinary as cheese can carry a city's soul. And then another letter arrives, this one from a tiny village in the north, where a former apprentice has started a new guild of weighers. She writes that they've adopted your weighing oath, that they use your calibration technique, that every new weigher reads your old ledger like scripture. You fold the letter gently. Legacy, it seems, isn't just painted portraits or archived pages. It's habits passed on. One evening, just before dusk, you leave the stall to Matteo for an hour and take a quiet walk. You wander past the old olive press, past the church steps where you once refused to weigh cheese during a wedding procession because the bride walked across your scale table. Past the bench where you ate your first paid meal with your first honest coin. You stop beneath a fig tree just coming into fruit. And you sit, just sit. No tools, no weights, no numbers, just the memory of years, of days, of wheels and people and ink stains and slow, steady service. The city continues without you for that hour. The sun rolls lower, a dog barks somewhere far off, and still you sit. Because you can, because you've built a world that doesn't collapse when you rest, because balance, once established, holds, and that is your greatest work. Let that truth rest gently over your thoughts. You've recorded, you've mentored, you've weighed and waited and withstood. You've made something that outlives you, not in stone or steel, but in trust. Let that be your sleep tonight. Let that be your peace. The scale is steady, the world is measured, and your hands, old and certain, have made it so. You wake to birdsong, not the urgent screeching of gulls or the argumentative coos of pigeons, but real, honest birdsong, soft, lilting, like flutes on the breeze. It's the kind of sound that reminds you why people write poems in the spring and fall in love in the summer. You rise slowly. No rush today. The square will wait. The wheels will come. But first, you sit by the window with your cup of morning brew, watching the shadows stretch across the cobblestones like yawns. You've been doing this a long time now, and yet the cheese still surprises you. A merchant brings in a wheel shaped like a spiral, aged under rosemary branches and wrapped in wax dyed with crushed violet petals. It's almost too beautiful to weigh. You handle it gently like a newborn idea. Its weight is perfect, its scent confusing and delightful. A young boy with dirt under his nails brings a crumbly wedge wrapped in a napkin. "My nonna made it," he says, eyes hopeful. "You take your time, weigh it, taste a sliver. It's rough, unrefined, but full of heart. You stamp it." The boy beams like he's won a war. Later, a traveller from a distant coast appears. She's heard rumours of your stall, of a weigher who writes poetry in the margins of his ledger, of a place where balance is more than a number. She asks to see your tools, your ledger. She doesn't speak your dialect well, but the language of hands and nods is universal. You show her the scale. She runs a fingertip along the polished brass. She smiles. "Honest," she says. One word. Enough. You let her weigh a wheel, just one. She does it carefully. The pan dips. The counterweight rises. She grins. "I see now," she says, "and maybe that's your legacy. Not the records in the archive, not the painted portrait or the guild honours, or even the letters that now arrive addressed to Master of Balance, but the understanding you've left in others, the invisible weight of trust, the small, consistent magic of fairness, the knowledge that somewhere someone cares enough to measure carefully." Matteo returns from the mayor's office that afternoon, waving a parchment. "They want to name the new market scale after you." You blink. "What? Why?" "Because it works every time." "Because it works." "Because it's always true." You consider it, then nod. Not because you need the honour, but because you know what it means to have something named after trust. That evening, as the sky fades to copper and plum, you and Matteo sit on the edge of the square, legs stretched, the stall closed, the scale covered. He leans back, hands behind his head. "You ever think about stopping?" he asks. You chuckle. "All the time?" But you don't. "No," you say, "I don't." He nods. "Because the world needs weighing." "No," you say softly. "Because I need it." He looks at you, puzzled. You smile. "Because it keeps me balanced." Let that final thought sink in. Let the twilight carry you into quiet. Let the slow creak of shutters and the rustle of leaves be your lullaby. Let the city soften around you. Let your breath slow. Let the last weight on the scale fall into perfect place. The stall is still, the streets are hushed, and in the silence, the balance holds. So now here we are. The scale rests. The tools are put away. The ledger, full, honest, and complete, lies closed beneath a folded cloth, the ink barely dry on its final page. You sit back in your wooden chair, shoulders no longer tensed, eyes soft. There's a hush now, not just in the square, but in your bones, a slow exhale after a long, steady effort. The world in all its mess and beauty has been weighed, and you held the balance. Outside, the evening deepens. Lanterns flicker to life in windows. A cat slips across the street like a shadow. Somewhere, a laugh echoes through a doorway. The rhythm of life continues. Not frantic, not rushed, but measured, familiar. You feel the cool air drift against your skin, smell the last trace of rosemary and rind in the folds of your cloak. You've built a world in small gestures, fair measurements, honest marks, and now you leave it gently behind, not abandoned, but entrusted. The work continues in careful hands. So close your eyes now. Let the stillness settle. You've done enough. The cheese is weighed, the ledger is closed, and the balance, quiet, golden, eternal, remains.